Section 19 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate Follis. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. The Prisoner. His chief occupation in the daytime was to stand on the bench by the small barred window and watch the pigeons on the roof and in the eaves of the house opposite. For 5 years he had done this. In the summer a great fire seemed to burn beneath the tin of the roof, for a quivering hot air rose from them, and the pigeons never alighted on them, save in the early morning or in the evening. Just over the peak could be seen the topmost branch of a maple, too slight to bear the weight of the pigeons, but the eaves were dark and cool, and there his eyes rested when he tired of the hard blue sky and the glare of the slates. In winter the roof was covered for weeks and months by a blanket of snow, which looked like a shawl of impacted wool, white and restful, and the windows of the house were spread with frost. But the pigeons were always gay, walking on the ledges or crowding on the shelves of the lead pipes. He studied them much, but he loved them more. His prison was less a prison because of them, and during those long 5 years he found himself more in touch with them than with the wardens of the prison or with any of his fellow prisoners. To the former he was respectful, and he gave them no trouble at all. With the latter he had nothing in common, for they were criminals, and he, so wild and mad with drink and anger was he at the time, that he had no remembrance, absolutely none, of how Jean Gamache lost his life. He remembered that they had played cards far into the night, that they had quarrelled, then made their peace, that the others had left, that they had begun gaming and drinking and quarrelling again, and then everything was blurred, save for a vague recollection that he had won all Gamache's money and had pocketed it. Afterwards came a blank. He waked to find 2 officers of the law beside him, and the body of Jean Gamache, stark and dreadful, a few feet away. When the officers put their hands upon him, he shook them off. When they did it again, he would have fought them to the death, had it not been for his friend, Tall Medallion, the auctioneer, who laid a strong hand on his arm and said, "Steady, Turgeon, steady," and he had yielded to the firm, friendly pressure. Medallion had left no stone unturned to clear him at the trial, had himself played detective unceasingly. But the hard facts remained, and on a chain of circumstantial evidence, Blaise Turgeon was convicted of manslaughter and sent to prison for 10 years. Blaise himself had said that he did not remember, but he could not believe that he had committed the crime. Robbery? He shrugged his shoulders at that. He insisted that his lawyer should not reply to the foolish and insulting suggestion. But the evidence went to show that Gamache had all the winnings when the other members of the party retired, and this very money had been found in Blaise's pocket. There was only Blaise's word that they had played cards again. Anger? Possibly. Blaise could not recall, though he knew they had quarrelled. The judge himself, charging the jury, said that he never before had seen a prisoner so frank, so outwardly honest, but he warned them that they must not lose sight of the crime itself, the taking of a human life, whereby a woman was made a widow and a child fatherless. The jury found him guilty. With few remarks the judge delivered his sentence, and then himself, shaken and pale, left the courtroom hurriedly, for Blaise Turgeon's father had been his friend from boyhood. Blaise took his sentence calmly, looking the jury squarely in the eyes, and when the judge stopped, he bowed to him, and then turned to the jury and said, "Gentlemen, you have ruined my life. You don't know, and I don't know, who killed the man. You have guessed, and I take the penalty. Suppose I'm innocent, how will you feel when the truth comes out? You've known me more or less these 20 years, and you've said, with evidently no more knowledge than I've got, that I did this horrible thing. I don't know but that one of you did it. But you are safe, and I take my 10 years." He turned from them, and as he did so, he saw a woman looking at him from a corner of the courtroom with a strange, wild expression. At the moment he saw no more than an excited, bewildered face, but afterwards this face came and went before him, flashing in and out of dark places, in a kind of mockery. As he went from the courtroom, another woman made her way to him, in spite of the guards. It was the Little Chemist's wife, who, years before, had been his father's housekeeper, who knew him when his eyes first opened on the world. "My poor Blaise, my poor Blaise," she said, clasping his manacled hands. In prison he refused to see all visitors, even Medallion, the Little Chemist's wife, and the good Father Fabre. Letters, too, he refused to accept and read. He had no contact, wished no contact with the outer world, but lived his hard, lonely life by himself, silent, studious. For now books were a pleasure to him. He had entered his prison a wild, excitable, dissipated youth, and he had become a mature, brooding man. 5 years had done the work of 20. The face of the woman who looked at him so strangely in the courtroom haunted him so that at last it became a part of his real life. Lived largely at the window, where he looked out at the pigeons on the roof of the hospital. "She was sorry for me," he said many a time to himself. He was shaken with misery often, so that he rocked to and fro as he sat on his bed, and a warder heard him cry out, even in the last days of his imprisonment, "O God, canst thou do everything but speak?" And again, "That hour, the memory of that hour, in exchange for my ruined life." One day the jailer came to him and said, "Monsieur Turgeon, you are free. The governor has cut off 5 years from your sentence." Then he was told that people were waiting without, Medallion, the Little Chemist and his wife, and others more important. But he would not go to meet them, and he stepped into the open world alone at dawn the next morning and looked out upon a still sleeping village. Suddenly there stood before him a woman who had watched by the prison gates all night, and she put out her hand in entreaty and said with a breaking voice, "You are free at last." He remembered her, the woman who had looked at him so anxiously and sorrowfully in the courtroom. "Why did you come to meet me?" he asked. "I was sorry for you. But that is no reason." "I once committed a crime," she whispered, with shrinking bitterness. "That's bad," he said. "Were you punished?" He looked at her keenly, almost fiercely, for a curious suspicion shot into his mind. She shook her head and answered no. "That's worse. I let someone else take my crime upon him and be punished for it," she said, an agony in her eyes. "Why was that?" "I had a little child," was her reply. "And the man who was punished instead?" "He was alone in the world," she said. A bitter smile crept to his lips, and his face was afire. He shut his eyes, and when they opened again, discovery was in them. "I remember you now," he said. "I remember now. I waked and saw you looking at me that night. Who was the father of your child?" "Jean Gamache," she replied. "He ruined me and left me to starve." "I am innocent of his death," he said quietly and gladly. She nodded. He was silent for a moment. "The child still lives?" he asked. She nodded again. "Well, let it be so," he said. "But you owe me 5 years and a good name." "I wish to God I could give them back," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It was for my child. He was so young." "It can't be helped now," he said, sighing, and he turned away from her. "Won't you forgive me?" she asked bitterly. "Won't you give me back those 5 years?" "If the child did not need me, I would give my life," she answered. "I owe it to you." Her haggard, haunted face made him sorry. He, too, had suffered. "It's all right," he answered gently. "Take care of your child." Again he moved away from her and went down the little hill with a cloud gone from his face that had rested there 5 years. Once he turned to look back. The woman was gone, but over the prison a flock of pigeons were flying. He took off his hat to them. Then he went through the town, looking neither to right nor left, and came to his own house, where the summer morning was already entering the open windows, though he had thought to find the place closed and dark. The little chemist's wife met him in the doorway. She could not speak, nor could he, but he kissed her as he had done when he went condemned to prison. Then he passed on to his own room, and entering, sat down before the open window and peacefully drank in the glory of a new world. But more than once he choked down a sob rising in his throat. End of section 19. Section 20 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate Follis. The Lane That Had No Turning and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. An Upset Price. Once Secord was as fine a man to look at as you would care to see, with a large, intelligent eye, a clear, healthy skin, and a full brown beard. He walked with a spring, had the gift of conversation, and took life as he found it, never too seriously, yet never carelessly. That was before he left the village of Pontiac in Quebec to offer himself as a surgeon to the American army. When he came back there was a change in him. He was still handsome, but something of the spring had gone from his walk. The quick light of his eyes had given place to a dark, dreamy expression. His skin became a little dulled, and his talk slower, though not less musical or pleasant. Indeed, his conversation had distinctly improved. Previously there was an undercurrent of self-consciousness. It was all gone now. He talked as one knowing his audience. His office became again, as it had been before, a rendezvous for the few interesting men of the place, including the avocat, the Cure, the Little Chemist, and Medallion. They played chess and écarté for certain hours of certain evenings in the week at Secord's house. Medallion was the first to notice that the wife, whom Secord had married soon after he came back from the war, occasionally put down her work and looked with a curious, inquiring expression at her husband as he talked. It struck Medallion that she was puzzled by some change in Secord. Secord was a brilliant surgeon, and with the knife in his hand, or beside a sick-bed, was admirable. His intuitive perception, so necessary in a physician, was very fine. He appeared to get at the core of a patient's trouble, and to decide upon necessary action with instant and absolute confidence. Some delicate operation performed by him was recorded and praised in the Lancet, and he was offered a responsible post in a medical college, and at the same time the goodwill of a valuable practice. He declined both, to the lasting astonishment, yet personal joy, of the Cure and the avocat, but as time went on, not so much to the surprise of the Little Chemist and Medallion. After 3 years, the sleepy Little Chemist waked up suddenly in his chair one day and said, "Parbleu! God bless me!" He loved to mix his native language with English, got up and went over to Secord's office, adjusted his glasses, looked at Secord closely, caught his hand with both of his own, shook it with shy abruptness, came back to his shop, sat down, and said, "God bless my soul, regardez ça!" Medallion made his discovery sooner. Watching closely, he had seen a pronounced deliberation infused through all Secord's indolence of manner, and noticed that often, before doing anything, the big eyes debated steadfastly, and the long, slender fingers ran down the beard softly. At times there was a deep meditativeness in the eye, again a dusky fire. But there was a certain charm through it all, a languid precision, a slumbering look in the face, a vague undercurrent in the voice, a fantastical flavour to the thought. The change had come so gradually that only Medallion and the wife had a real conception of how great it was. Medallion had studied Secord from every standpoint. At the very first he wondered if there was a woman in it. Much thinking on a woman, whose influence on his life was evil or disturbing, might account somewhat for the change in Secord. But, seeing how fond the man was of his wife, Medallion gave up that idea. It was not liquor, for Secord never touched it. One day, however, when Medallion was selling the furniture of a house, he put up a feather bed, and, as was his custom, for he was a whimsical fellow, let his humour have play. He used many metaphors as to the virtue of the bed, crowning them with the statement that you slept in it dreaming as delicious dreams as though you had eaten poppy or mandragora or— He stopped short, said, "By Jingo, that's it!" knocked the bed down instantly, and was an utter failure for the rest of the day. The wife was longer in discovering the truth, but a certain morning, as her husband lay sleeping after an all-night sitting with a patient, she saw, lying beside him, it had dropped from his waistcoat pocket, a little bottle full of a dark liquid. She knew that he always carried his medicine vials in a pocket case. She got the case and saw that none was missing. She noticed that the cork of the vial was well worn. She took it out and smelled the liquid. Then she understood. She waited and watched. She saw him after he waked look watchfully round, quietly take a wine-glass, and let the liquid come, drop by drop, into it from the point of his forefinger. Henceforth she read with understanding the changes in his manner, and saw behind the mingled abstraction and fanciful meditation of his talk. She had not yet made up her mind what to do. She saw that he hid it from her assiduously. He did so more because he wished not to pain her than from furtiveness. By nature he was open and brave, and had always had a reputation for plainness and sincerity. She was in no sense his equal in intelligence or judgment, not even in instinct. She was a woman of more impulse and constitutional good nature than depth. It is probable that he knew that, and refrained from letting her into the knowledge of this vice, contracted in the war, when, seriously ill, he was able to drag himself about from patient to patient only by the help of opium. He was alive to his position and its consequences, and faced it. He had no children, and he was glad of this for one reason. He could do nothing now without the drug. It was as necessary as light to him. The little bottle had been his friend so long that, with his finger on its smooth-edged cork, it was as though he held the tap of life. The Little Chemist and Medallion kept the thing to themselves, but they understood each other in the matter, and wondered what they could do to cure him. The Little Chemist only shrank back and said, "No, no, pardon, my friend," when Medallion suggested that he should speak to Secord. But the Little Chemist was greatly concerned, for had not Secord saved his beloved wife by a clever operation, and was it not her custom to devote a certain hour every week to the welfare of Secord's soul and body before the shrine of the Virgin? Her husband told her now that Secord was in trouble, and though he was far from being devout himself, he had a shy faith in the great sincerity of his wife. She did her best, and increased her offerings of flowers to the shrine. Also, in her simplicity, she sent Secord's wife little jars of jam to comfort him. One evening the little coterie met by arrangement at the doctor's house. After waiting an hour or two for Secord, who had been called away to a critical case, the Avocat and the Cure went home, leaving polite, old-fashioned messages for their absent host. But the Little Chemist and Medallion remained. For a time Mrs. Secord remained with them, then retired, begging them to await her husband, who, she knew, would be grateful if they stayed. The Little Chemist, with timid courtesy, showed her out of the room, then came back and sat down. They were very silent. The Little Chemist took off his glasses a half-dozen times, wiped them and put them back, then suddenly turned on Medallion. "You mean to speak tonight?" "Yes, that's what I intend, just here." "Regardez ça. Well, well." Medallion never smoked harder than he did then. The Little Chemist looked at him nervously again and again, listened towards the door, fingered with his tumbler, and at last, hearing the sound of sleigh bells, suddenly came to his feet and said, "Voilà, I will go to my wife." And catching up his cap, and forgetting his overcoat, he trotted away home in fright. What Medallion did or said to Secord that night neither ever told. But it must have been a singular scene, for when the humorist pleads or prays, there is no pathos like it. And certainly Medallion's eyes were red when he wrapped up the Little Chemist at dawn, caught him by the shoulders, turned him round several times, thumped him on the back, and called him a bully old boy, and then, seeing the old wife in her quaint padded nightgown, suddenly hugged her, threw himself into a chair, and almost shouted for a cup of coffee. At the same time, Mrs. Secord was alternately crying and laughing in her husband's arms, and he was saying to her, "I'll make a fight for it, Leslie, a big fight. But you must be patient, for I expect I'll be a devil sometimes without it. Why, I've eaten a dram a day of the stuff, or drunk its equivalent in the tincture. No, never mind praying. Be a brick and fight with me. That's the game, my girl." He did make a fight for it, such an one as few men have made and come out safely. For those who dwell in the pit never suffer as do they who struggle with this appetite. He was too wise to give it up all at once. He diminished the dose gradually, but still very perceptibly. As it was, it made a marked change in him. The necessary effort of the will gave a kind of hard coldness to his face, and he used to walk his garden for hours at night in conflict with his enemy. His nerves were uncertain, but, strange to say, when, it was not often, any serious case of illness came under his hands, he was somehow able to pull himself together and do his task gallantly enough. But he had no important surgical case since he began his cure. In his heart he lived in fear of one, for he was not quite sure of himself. In spite of effort to the contrary, he became irritable, and his old pleasant fantasies changed to gloomy and bizarre imaginings. The wife never knew what it cost her husband thus, day by day, to take a foe by the throat and hold him in check. She did not guess that he knew if he dropped back even once, he could not regain himself. This was his idiosyncrasy. He did not find her a great help to him in his trouble. She was affectionate, but she had not much penetration even where he was concerned, and she did not grasp how much was at stake. She thought, indeed, that he should be able to give it up all at once. He was tender with her, but he wished often that she could understand him without explanation on his part. Many a time he took out the little bottle with a reckless hand, but conquered himself. He got most help, perhaps, from the honest, cheerful eye of Medallion and the stumbling, timorous affection of the Little Chemist. They were perfectly disinterested friends. His wife at times made him aware that he had done her a wrong, for he had married her with this appetite on him. He did not defend himself, but he wished she would, even if she had to act it, make him believe in himself more. One morning, against his will, he was irritable with her, and she said something that burnt like caustic. He smiled ironically and pushed his newspaper over to her, pointing to a paragraph. It was the announcement that an old admirer of hers, whom she had passed by for her husband, had come into a fortune. "Perhaps you've made a mistake," he said. She answered nothing, but the look she gave was unfortunate for both. He muffled his mouth in his long silken beard, as if to smother what he felt impelled to say, then suddenly rose and left the table. At this time he had reduced his dose of the drug to 8 drops twice a day. With a grim courage he resolved to make it 5, all at once. He did so, and held to it. Medallion was much with him in these days. One morning in the spring he got up, went out in his garden, drew in the fresh sweet air with a great gulp, picked some lovely crab-apple blossoms, and with a strange glowing look in his eyes, came in to his wife, put them into her hands, and kissed her. It was the anniversary of their wedding day. Then, without a word, he took from his pocket the little vial that he had carried so long, rolled it for an instant in his palm, felt its worn, discoloured cork musingly, and threw it out of the window. "Now, my dear," he whispered, "we will be happy again." He held to his determination with a stern anxiety. He took a month's vacation and came back better. He was not so happy as he hoped to be, yet he would not whisper to himself the reason why. He felt that something had failed him somewhere. One day a man came riding swiftly up to his door to say that his wife's father had met with a bad accident in his great mill. Secord told his wife. A peculiar troubled look came into his face as he glanced carefully over his instruments and through his medicine case. "God, I must do it alone," he said. The old man's injury was a dangerous one. A skillful operation was necessary. As Secord stood beside the sufferer, he felt his nerves suddenly go, just as they did in the war before he first took the drug. His wife was in the next room. He could hear her. He wished she would make no sound at all. Unless this operation was performed successfully, the sufferer would die. He might die anyhow. Secord tried to gather himself up to his task, but he felt it was of no use. A month later, when he was more recovered physically, he would be able to perform the operation, but the old man was dying now, while he stood helplessly stroking his big brown beard. He took up his pocket medicine case and went out where his wife was. Excited and tearful, she started up to meet him, painfully inquiring. "Can you save him?" she said. "Oh, James, what is the matter? You're trembling." "It's just this way, Leslie. My nerve is broken. I can't perform the operation as I am, and he will die in an hour if I don't." She caught him by the arm. "Can you not be strong? You have a will. Will you not try to save my father, James? Is there no way?" "Yes, there is one way," he said. He opened the pocket case and took out a phial of laudanum. "This is the way. I can pull myself together with it. It will save his life." There was a dogged look in his face. "Well, well?" she said. "Oh, my dear father, will you not keep him here?" A peculiar cold smile hovered about his lips. "But there is danger to me in this. And remember, he is very old." "Oh!" she cried. "How can you be so shocking, so cruel?" She rocked herself to and fro. "If it will save him, and you need not take it again, ever." "But I tell you—" "Do you not hear him? He is dying." She was mad with grief. She hardly knew what she said. Without a word, he dropped the tincture swiftly in a wine-glass of water, drank it off, shivered, drew himself up with a start, gave a sigh as if some huge struggle was over, and went in to where the old man was. 3 hours after, he told his wife that her father was safe. When, after a hasty kiss, she left him and went into the room of sickness, and the door closed after her, standing where she had left him, he laughed a hard, crackling laugh, and said between his teeth, "An upset price." Then he poured out another portion of the dark tincture, the largest he had ever taken, and tossed it off. That night he might have been seen feeling about the grass in a moonlit garden. At last he put something in his pocket with a quick, harsh chuckle of satisfaction. It was a little black bottle with a well-worn cork. End of section 20. Section 21 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate Follis. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. A Fragment of Lives. They met at last, Dubarre and Villiard, the man who had stolen from him the woman he loved. Both had wronged the woman, but Villiard most, for he had let her die because of jealousy. They were now in a room alone in the forest of Saint Sebastian. Both were quiet, and both knew that the end of their hatred was near. Going to a cupboard, Dubarre brought out 4 glasses and put them on the table. Then from 2 bottles he poured out what looked like red wine, 2 glasses from each bottle. Putting the bottles back, he returned to the table. "Do you dare to drink with me?" Dubarre asked, nodding towards the glasses. 2 of the glasses have poison in them. 2 have good red wine only. We will move them about and then drink. Both may die, or only one of us." Villiard looked at the other with contracting, questioning eyes. "You would play that game with me?" he asked in a mechanical voice. "It would give me great pleasure." The voice had a strange, ironical tone. "It is grand sport, as one would take a run at a crevasse and clear it, or fall. If we both fall, we are in good company. If you fall, I have the greater joy of escape. If I fall, you have the same joy." "I am ready," was the answer. "But let us eat first." A great fire burned in the chimney, for the night was cool. It filled the room with a gracious heat, and with huge, comfortable shadows. Here and there on the wall a tin cup flashed back the radiance of the fire. The barrel of a gun glistened soberly along a rafter, and the long, wiry hair of an otter skin in the corner sent out little needles of light. Upon the fire a pot was simmering, and a good savour came from it. A wind went lilting by outside the hut, in tune with the singing of the kettle. The ticking of a huge, old-fashioned repeating watch on the wall was in unison with these. Dubarre rose from the table, threw himself upon the little pile of otter skins, and lay watching Villiard and mechanically studying the little room. Villiard took the 4 glasses filled with the wine and laid them on a shelf against the wall, then began to put the table in order for their supper, and to take the pot from the fire. Dubarre noticed that just above where the glasses stood on the shelf a crucifix was hanging, and that red crystal sparkled in the hands and feet where the nails should be driven in. There was a painful humour in the association. He smiled, then turned his head away, for old memories flashed through his brain. He had been an acolyte once. He had served at the altar. Suddenly Dubarre rose, took the glasses from the shelf, and placed them in the middle of the table, the death's head for the feast. As they sat down to eat, the eyes of both men unconsciously wandered to the crucifix, attracted by the red sparkle of the rubies. They drank water with the well-cooked meat of the wapiti, though red wine faced them on the table. Each ate heartily, as though a long day were before them and not the shadow of the long night. There was no speech save that of the usual courtesies of the table. The fire and the wind and the watch seemed the only living things besides themselves, perched there between heaven and earth. At length the meal was finished, and the 2 turned in their chairs towards the fire. There was no other light in the room, and on the faces of the 2, still and cold, the flame played idly. "When?" said Dubarre at last. "Not yet," was the quiet reply. "I was thinking of my first theft, an apple from my brother's plate," said Dubarre with a dry smile. You? I, of my first lie. That apple was the sweetest fruit I ever tasted. And I took the penalty of the lie, but I had no sorrow. Again there was silence. Now? Asked Villiard, after an hour had passed. I am ready. They came to the table. Shall we bind our eyes? Asked Dubarre. I do not know the glasses that hold the poison. Nor I the bottles that held it. I will turn my back, and do you change about the glasses. Villiard turned his face towards the timepiece on the wall. As he did so, it began to strike, a clear, silvery chime. 1, 2, 3. Before it had finished striking, both men were facing the glasses again. Take one, said Dubarre. Villiard took the one nearest himself. Dubarre took one also. Without a word they lifted the glasses and drank. Again, said Dubarre. You choose, responded Villiard. Dubarre lifted the one nearest himself, and Villiard picked up the other. Raising their glasses again, they bowed to each other and drank. The watch struck 12, and stopped its silvery chiming. They both sat down, looking at each other, the light of an enormous chance in their eyes, the tragedy of a great stake in their clenched hands. But the deeper, intenser power was in the face of Dubarre, the explorer. There was more than power. Malice drew down the brows and curled the sensitive upper lip. Each man watched the other for knowledge of his own fate. The glasses lay straggling along the table, emptied of death and life. All at once a horrible pallor spread over the face of Villiard, and his head jerked forward. He grasped the table with both hands, twitching and trembling. His eyes stared wildly at Dubarre, to whose face the flush of wine had come, whose look was now maliciously triumphant. Villiard had drunk both glasses of the poison. I win! Dubarre stood up. Then, leaning over the table towards the dying man, he added, You let her die. Well, would you know the truth? She loved you. Always. Villiard gasped, and his look wandered vaguely along the opposite wall. Dubarre went on. I played the game with you honestly, because it was the greatest man could play. And I, too, sinned against her. Now die. She loved you. Murderer. The man's look still wandered distractedly along the wall. The sweat of death was on his face. His lips were moving spasmodically. Suddenly his look became fixed. He found voice. Pardon, Jésus, he said, and stiffened where he sat. His eyes were fixed on the jewelled crucifix. Dubarre snatched it from the wall, and hastening to him held it to his lips, but the warm sparkle of the rubies fell on eyes that were cold as frosted glass. Dubarre saw that he was dead. Because the woman loved him, he said, gazing curiously at the dead man. He turned, went to the door, and opened it, for his breath choked him. All was still on the wooded heights and in the wide valley. Because the woman loved him, he repented, said Dubarre again, with a half-cynical gentleness, as he placed the crucifix on the dead man's breast. End of section 21.
Section 22 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by MaryAnn Spiegel. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac, by Gilbert Parker. The Man That Died at Alma. The man who died at Alma had a Kilkenny brogue that you could not cut with a knife. But he was called Kilquahanity, a name as Scottish as MacGregor. Kilquahanity was a retired soldier, on pension, and Pontiac was a place of peace and poverty. The only gentry were the curé, the advocate, and the young seigneur, but of the three the only one with a private income was the young seigneur. What should such a common man as Kilquahanity do with a private income? It seemed almost suspicious, instead of creditable, to the minds of the simple folk at Pontiac, for they were French, and poor, and laborious, and Kilquahanity drew his pension from the headquarters of the English government, which they only knew by legends wafted to them over great tracts of country from the city of Quebec. When Kilquahanity first came with his wife, it was without introductions from anywhere, unlike everybody else in Pontiac, whose family history could be instantly reduced to an exact record by the curé. He had a smattering of French, which he turned off with oily brusqueness. He was not closed-mouthed. He talked freely of events in his past life, and he told some really wonderful tales of his experience in the British Army. He was no braggart, however, and his one great story, which gave him the nickname by which he was called at Pontiac, was told far more in a spirit of laughter at himself than in praise of his own part in the incident. The first time he told the story was in the house of Medallion, the auctioneer. "Oh, the night it was," said Kilquahanity, after a pause, blowing a cloud of tobacco smoke in the air. "The night it was, me darlings. Bither cauld in that Rousian country, though but late summer, and nothing to ate but a lump of bread, no bigger than a dicky bird's skull. Nothing to drink but wather. Turrible, turrible, and for clothes to wear. Mother of Moses, that was a bad day for clothes. We got betune no barrack quilts that night. No stocking had I inside me boots. No shirt had I, but a hare's quilt sewed on to me. No heart I had inside me body. Nothing at all but duty and standing to orders, me byes. Says Sergeant Major Kilpatrick to me, 'Kilquahanity,' says he, 'there's bither places than River Alma to live by,' says he. Faith, and by the Liffey I wish I was this moment. Liffey's in old Ireland, Frenchies. But, Kilquahanity, says he, faith, and it's the Liffey we'll never see again, and put that in your pipe and smoke it. And through for him. But that night, oh, that night, every bone in me body was aching, and sure me heart was aching too, for the poor boys that were fighting hard and getting little for it. Bither cauld it was, bither cauld, and the boys dropping down, dropping, 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 with the Rousian bullets in them. 'Kilquahanity,' says Sergeant Major Kilpatrick to me, 'it's this standing still, while we be dropping, dropping, that girds the soul avier.' Oh, the sight it was, the sight it was. The boys of the regiment, standing, shoulder to shoulder, and the faces of 'em blue with powder, and red with blood, and the bits of boys dropping round me, like twigs of an old tree in a storm. Just a cry and a bit of a gurgle through the teeth, and divil the one of them would see the lifey side any more. 'The Rousians are charging,' shouts Sergeant Major Kilpatrick. 'The Rousians are charging, here they come.' Standing beside me was a bit of a lump of a bye, as fine a lad as ever stood in the boots of me regiment. Ah, the look of his face was the look of the dead. 'The Rousians are coming, they're charging,' says Sergeant Major Kilpatrick, and the bit of a bye that had nothing to eat all day throws down his gun and turns round to run. 18 years old he was, only 18. Just a straight slip of a lad from Malahide. 'Hold on, Teddy,' says I. 'Hold on. How'll you face your mother if you turn your back on the enemy of your country?' The bye looks at me in the eyes long enough to wink 3 times, picks up his gun, and stood like a rock, he did, till the Rousians charged us, roared on us, and I saw me slip of a bye go down under the sabre of a damned Cossack. Mother, I heard him say. Mother, and that's all I heard him say, and the mother waiting away aft there by the life beside. Ah, wurra, wurra. The byes go down to battle, and the mothers wait at home. Some of the byes come back, but the most of them stay where the battle laves them. Wurra, wurra. Many's the bye went down that day by Alma River, and never come back. There I was standing when hell broke loose on the byes of me regiment, and devil the one of me knows if I killed the Rousian that day or not. But Sergeant Major Kilpatrick, a bit of a liar was the Sergeant Major, says he. It was 10 ye killed, Kilquahonety. He says to me the night that I left the regiment for ever, and all the byes standing round and lifting glasses and saying, Kilquahonety, 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 as if it was sugar and honey in their mouths. Oh, the sound of it. Kilquahonety, says he, it was 10 ye killed. But byes, the Sergeant Major was an awful liar. If he could be doing anybody any good by lying, sure he would be lying all the time. But it's little I know how many I killed, for I was killed myself that day. A Rousian sabre claved the shoulder and neck of me, and down I went, and over me trampled a squadron of Rousian horses, and I stopped thinking. Oh, so easy, so easy. I slipped away of the fight. Their shrieking and roaring kept dwindling and dwindling, and I dropped all into a fine sleep. So quiet, so easy. And I thought that slip of a lad from the life beside was holding me hand and saying, Mother, Mother, and we both went asleep. And the byes of the regiment, when Alma was over, they said to each other, the byes, they said, Kilquahonety's dead. And the trenches was dug, and all we fine dead boys was laid in long rows, like candles in the trenches. And I was laid in among them, and Sergeant Major Kilpatrick standing there and looking at me and saying, Poor bye, poor bye. But when they threw another man on top of me, I waked up out of that beautiful sleep and gave him a kick. You're not polite, says I to myself. Sure, I couldn't spake, there was no strength in me. And they threw another man on, and I kicked again. And the Sergeant Major, he sees it, and shouts out, Kilquahonety's legs a-kicking, says he. And they pulled off the 2 poor devils that had been thrown o' top of me. And the Sergeant Major lifts me head, and he says, You're not killed, Kilquahonety, says he. Divil a word could I spake, but I winked at him, and Captain Masham, standing by, whisked out a flask. Put that between his teeth, says he. When I got it there, thrust me for not letting it go. And the Sergeant Major says to me, I have hopes of you, Kilquahonety, when you do be drinking like that. And a fine thirsty healthy corpse I am, says I. A dozen hands stretched out to give Kilquahonety a drink, for even the best story of Pontiac could not have told his tale so well. Yet the success achieved by Kilquahonety at such moments was discounted through long months of mingled suspicion and doubtful tolerance. Although both he and his wife were Catholics, so they said, and so it seemed, Kilquahonety never went to confession or took the Blessed Sacrament. The curé spoke to Kilquahonety's wife about it, and she said she could do nothing with her husband. Her tongue once loosed, she spoke freely, and what she said was little to the credit of Kilquahonety. Not that she could urge any horrible things against him, but she railed at minor faults till the curé dismissed her with some good advice upon wives rehearsing their husbands' faults, even to the parish priest. Mrs. Kilquahonety could not get the curé to listen to her, but she was more successful elsewhere. One day she came to get Kilquahonety's pension, which was sent every 3 months through Monsieur Guérin, the advocate. After she had handed over the receipt prepared beforehand by Kilquahonety, she replied to Monsieur Guérin's inquiry concerning her husband, in these words, Mr. Guérin, sir, such a man it is, enough to break the heart of any woman. And the temper of him, Mr. Garon, the temper of him that's awful, awful. No consideration, and that ugly-hearted. Got win a soldier by. The things he does. My, the things he does. She threw up her hands with an air of distraction. Well, and what does he do, madame? Asked the advocate simply. And what he says, too, the awful of it, and the bad sour heart in him. What's he lying in his bed for now, and the new year coming on, when we ought to be praising God and enjoying each other's company in this blessed world? What's he lying between the quilts now for, but by token of the bad heart in him? It's a wicked cold he has, and how did he come by it? I'll tell ye, Mr. Garon. So wild was he, yesterday it was a week, so black mad with something I'd said to him, and something that slipped from me hand at his head, that he turns his back on me, throws open the door, steps out into the snow, and standing there alone, he curses the wide world. Oh dear, Mr. Garon, he cursed the wide world, standing there in the snow. God forgive the black heart of him, standing out there cursing the wide world. The advocate looked at the sergeant's wife musingly, the fingers of his hands tapping together, but he did not speak. He was becoming wiser, all in a moment, as to the ways of women. And now he's in bed, the strapping blasphemer, for the cold he got standing there in the snow cursing the wide world. Ah, Mr. Garon, pity a poor woman that has to live with the likes o' that. The advocate did not speak. He turned his face away and looked out of the window, where his eyes could see the little house on the hill, which today had the Union Jack flying in honour of some battle or some victory dear to Kilquahonnety's heart. It looked peaceful enough, the little house lying there in the waste of snow, banked up with earth, and sheltered on the northwest by a little grove of pines. At last Monsieur Garon rose, and lifting himself up and down on his toes, as if about to deliver a legal opinion, he coughed slightly, and then said in a dry little voice, Madame, I shall have the pleasure in calling on your husband. You have not seen the matter in the true light. Madame, I bid you good day. That night the advocate, true to his promise, called on Sergeant Kilquahonnety. Kilquahonnety was alone in the house. His wife had gone to the village for the little chemist. She had been roused at last to the serious nature of Kilquahonnety's illness. Mr. Garon knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again more loudly, and still no answer. He opened the door and entered into a clean, warm living room, so hot that the heat came to him in waves, buffeting his face. Dining, sitting, and drawing-room, it was also a sort of winter kitchen, and side by side with relics of Kilquahonnety's soldier life were clean, bright tins, black saucepans, strings of dried fruit, and well-cured hams. Certainly the place had an air of home. It spoke for the absent termagant. Monsieur Garon looked round and saw a half-opened door, through which presently came a voice speaking in a laboured whisper. The advocate knocked gently at the door. "May I come in, Sergeant?" he asked, and entered. There was no light in the room, but the fire in the kitchen stove threw a glow over the bed where the sick man lay. The big hands of the soldier moved restlessly on the quilt. "Aye, it's the kind of ye," said Kilquahonnety with difficulty, out of the half-shadows. The advocate took one burning hand in both of his, held it for a moment, and pressed it 2 or 3 times. He did not know what to say. "We must have a light," said he at last, and taking a candle from the shelf, he lighted it at the stove and came into the bedroom again. This time he was startled. Even in this short illness, Kilquahonnety's flesh had dropped away from him, leaving him but a bundle of bones, on which the skin quivered with fever. Every word the sick man tried to speak cut his chest like a knife, and his eyes half started from his head with the agony of it. The advocate's heart sank within him, for he saw that a life was hanging in the balance. Not knowing what to do, he tucked in the bedclothes gently. "I do be thinkin'," said the strained, whispering voice. "I do be thinkin' I could smoke." The advocate looked round the room, saw the pipe on the window, and cutting some tobacco from a plug, he tenderly filled the old black corncob. Then he put the stem in Kilquahannity's mouth and held the candle to the bowl. Kilquahannity smiled, drew a long breath, and blew out a cloud of thick smoke. For a moment he puffed vigorously. Then, all at once, the pleasure of it seemed to die away, and presently the bowl dropped down on his chin. Monsieur Guerin lifted it away. Kilquahannity did not speak, but kept saying something over and over again to himself, looking beyond Monsieur Guerin abstractedly. At that moment the front door of the house opened, and presently a shrill voice came through the door. "Shmokin'! Shmokin'! Are ye, Kilquahannity? As soon as me back's turned, it's playin' the fool." She stopped short, seeing the advocate. "Beggin' your pardon, Mr. Guerin," she said. "I thought it was only Kilquahannity here, and he with no more sense than a babby." Kilquahannity's eyes closed, and he buried one side of his head in the pillow, so that her shrill voice should not pierce his ears. "The little chemist'll be comin' in a minute. Dear Mr. Guerin," said the wife presently, and she began to fuss with the bedclothes, and to be nervously and uselessly busy. "Oh, leave them alone, darlin'," whispered Kilquahannity, tossing. Her officiousness seemed to hurt him more than the pain in his chest. Monsieur Guerin did not wait for the little chemist to arrive, but after pressing the sergeant's hand, he left the house and went straight to the house of the curé, and told him in what condition was the black sheep of his flock. When Monsieur Guerin returned to his own home, he found a visitor in his library. It was a woman, and between 40 and 50 years of age, who rose slowly to her feet as the advocate entered, and, without preliminaries, put into his hand a document. "That is who I am," she said. "Mary Muddock that was, Mary Kilquahannity that is." The advocate held in his hands the marriage lines of Matthew Kilquahannity of the parish of Malahide and Mary Muddock of the parish of St. Giles, London. The advocate was completely taken aback. He blew nervously through his pale fingers, raised himself up and down on his toes, and grew pale through suppressed excitement. He examined the certificate carefully, though from the first he had no doubt of its accuracy and correctness. "Well," said the woman, with a hard look in her face and a hard note in her voice. "Well." The advocate looked at her musingly for a moment. All at once there had been unfolded to him Kilquahannity's story. In his younger days Kilquahannity had married this woman, with a face of tin and a heart of leather. It needed no confession from Kilquahannity's own lips to explain by what hard paths he had come to the reckless hour when, at Blackpool, he had left her forever, as he thought. In the flush of his criminal freedom he had married again, with the woman who shared his home on the little hillside, behind the parish church, she believing him a widower. Mary Muddock, with the stupidity of her class, had never gone to the right quarters to discover his whereabouts until a year before this day, when she stood in the advocate's library. At last, through the War Office, she had found the whereabouts of her missing Matthew. She had gathered her little savings together and, after due preparation, had sailed away to Canada to find the soldier boy whom she had never given anything but bad hours in all the days of his life with her. "Well," said the woman, "you're a lawyer. Have you nothing to say? You pay his pension. Next time you'll pay it to me. I'll teach him to leave me and my kid and go off with an Irish cook." The advocate looked her steadily in the eyes, and then delivered the strongest blow that was possible from the opposite side of the case. "Madam," said he, "Madam, I regret to inform you that Matthew Kilquahannity is dying." "Dying, is he?" said the woman, with a sudden change of voice and manner, but her whine did not ring true. "The poor darlin', and only that Irish hag to care for him. Has he made a will?" she added eagerly. Kilquahannity had made no will, and the little house on the hillside and all that he had belonged to this woman who had spoiled the first part of his life and had now come to spoil the last part. An hour later the advocate, the curé, and the two women stood in the chief room of the little house on the hillside. The door was shut between the two rooms, and the little chemist was with Kilquahannity. The curé's hand was on the arm of the first wife, and the advocate's upon the arm of the second. The two women were glaring eye to eye, having just finished, as fine a torrent of abuse of each other and of Kilquahanity as can be imagined. Kilquahanity himself, with the sorrow of death upon him, though he knew it not, had listened to the brawl, his chickens come home to roost at last. The first Mrs. Kilquahanity had sworn, with an oath that took no account of the cure's presence, that not a stick nor stone, nor a rag nor a penny, should that Irish slattern have of Matthew Kilquahanity's. The cure and the advocate had quieted them at last, and the cure spoke sternly now to both women. "In the presence of death," said he, "have done with your sinful clatter. Stop quarrelling over a dying man. Let him go in peace. Let him go in peace. If I hear one word more," he added sternly, "I will turn you both out of the house into the night. I will have the man die in peace." Opening the door of the bedroom, the cure went in and shut the door, bolting it quietly behind him. The little chemist sat by the bedside, and Kilquahanity lay as still as a babe upon the bed. His eyes were half closed, for the little chemist had given him an opiate to quiet the terrible pain. The cure saw that the end was near. He touched Kilquahanity's arm. "My son," he said, "look up. You have sinned. You must confess your sins and repent." Kilquahanity looked at him with dazed but half-smiling eyes. "Are they gone? Are the women gone?" The cure nodded his head. Kilquahanity's eyes closed and opened again. "They're gone, then. Oh, the foin of it, the foin of it," he whispered. "So quiet, so aisy, so quiet. Faith, I'll just be shlapin'. I'll be shlapin' now." His eyes closed, but the cure touched his arm again. "My son," said he, "look up. Do you thoroughly and earnestly repent of your sins?" His eyes opened again. "Yis, father. Oh, yis. There's been a dale o' noise. There's been a dale o' noise in the world, father," said he. "Oh, so quiet now. I do be shlapin'." A smile crossed his face. "Oh, the foin of it. I do be shlapin'. And he fell into a noiseless sleep. End of section 22.
Section 23 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. The Baron of Beauregard. The manor house at Beauregard, monsieur? Ah, certainly, I mind it very well. It was the first in Quebec, and there are many tales. It had a chapel and a gallows. Its baron, he had the power of life and death, and the right of the seigneur, you understand, which he used only once, and then what trouble it made for him and the woman, and the barony, and the parish, and all the country. "What is the whole story, Larue?" said Medallion, who had spent months in the seigneur's company, stalking game and tales and legends of the St. Lawrence. Larue spoke English very well. His mother was English. Mais I do not know for sure, but the Abbé Fronton, he and I were snowed up together in that same house, which now belongs to the church, and in the big fireplace, where we sat on a bench toasting our knees and our bacon, he told me the tale as he knew it. He was a great scholar. There was none greater. He had found papers in the wall of the house, and from the government chest he got more. Then there were the tales handed down, and the records of the church, for she knew the true story of every man that has come to New France, from first to last. So, because I have a taste for tales, and gave him some, he told me of the Baron of Beauregard, and that time he took the right of the seigneur, and the end of it all. Of course, it was 150 years ago, when Bigot was intendant. Ah, what a rascal was that Bigot, robber and deceiver! He never stood by a friend, and never fought fair a foe. So the abbé said. Well, Beauregard was no longer young. He had built the manor house, he had put up his gallows, he had his vassals, he had been made a lord. He had quarrelled with Bigot, and had conquered, but at great cost, for Bigot had such power, and the governor had trouble enough to care for himself against Bigot, though he was Beauregard's friend. Well, there was a good lump of a fellow who had been a soldier, and he picked out a girl in the seigneurie of Beauregard to make his wife. It is said the girl herself was not set for the man, for she was of finer stuff than the peasants about her, and showed it. But her father and mother had a dozen other children, and what was this girl, this Follis, to do? She said yes to the man, the time was fixed for the marriage, and it came along. So, at the very hour of the wedding, Beauregard came by, for the church was in mending, and he had given leave it should be in his own chapel. Well, he rode by just as the bride was coming out with the man, Gavroche. When Beauregard saw Follis, he gave a whistle, then spoke in his throat, reined up his horse, and got down. He fastened his eyes on the girls. A strange look passed between them. He had never seen her before, but she had seen him often, and when he was gone had helped the housekeepers with his rooms. She had carried away with her a stray glove of his. Of course it sounds droll, and they said of her when all came out that it was wicked, but evil is according to a man's own heart, and the girl had hid this glove as she hid whatever was in her soul, hid it even from the priest. Well, the Baron looked, and she looked, and he took off his hat, stepped forward, and kissed her on the cheek. She turned pale as a ghost, and her eyes took the colour that her cheeks lost. When he stepped back, he looked close at the husband. "What is your name?" he said. "Garouche, Monsieur le Baron," was the reply. "Garouche, Garouche," he said, eyeing him up and down. "You have been a soldier?" "Yes, Monsieur le Baron." "You have served with me?" "Against you, Monsieur le Baron, when Bigot came fighting." "Better against me than for me," said the Baron, speaking to himself, though he had so strong a voice that what he said could be heard by those near him, that is, those who were tall, for he was 6½ feet, with legs and shoulders like a bull. He stooped and stroked the head of his hound for a moment, and all the people stood and watched him, wondering what next. At last he said, "And what part played you in that siege, Garouche?" Garouche looked troubled, but answered, "It was in the way of duty, Monsieur le Baron. I, with 5 others, captured the relief party sent from your cousin, the Seigneur of Vadrome." "Oh," said the Baron, looking sharp, "you were in that, were you? Then you know what happened to the young Marmette?" Garouche trembled a little, but drew himself up and said, "Monsieur le Baron, I tried to kill the intendant. There was no other way." "What part played you in that, Garouche?" Some trembled, for they knew the truth, and they feared the mad will of the Baron. "I ordered the firing party, Monsieur le Baron," he answered. The Baron's eyes got fierce, and his face hardened, but he stooped and drew the ears of the hound through his hand softly. "Marmette was my cousin's son, and had lived with me," he said. "A brave lad, and he had a nice hatred of vileness, else he had not died." A strange smile played on his lips for a moment, then he looked at Follis steadily. Who can tell what was working in his mind? "War is war," he went on, "and Bigot was your master, Garouche. But a man pays for his master's sins this way or that. Yet I would not have it different, no, not a jot. Then he turned round to the crowd, raised his hat to the curé, who stood on the chapel steps, once more looked steadily at Follis, and said, "You shall all come to the manor house and have your feastings there, and we will drink to the homecoming of the fairest woman in my barony." With that he turned round, bowed to Follis, put on his hat, got the bridle through his arm, and led his horse to the manor house. This was in the afternoon. Of course, whether they wished it or not, Garouche and Follis could not refuse, and the people were glad enough, for they would have a free hand at meat and wine, the Baron being liberal of table. And it was as they guessed, for though the time was so short, the people at Beauregard soon had the tables heavy with food and drink. It was just at the time of candle-lighting the Baron came in and gave a toast. "To the dwellers in Eden tonight," he said, "Eden against the time of the angel and the sword." I do not think that any except the curé and the woman understood, and she, maybe, only because a woman feels the truth about a thing, even when her brain does not. After they had done shouting to his toast, he said a good night to all, and they began to leave, the curé among the first to go, with a troubled look on his face. As the people left, the Baron said to Garouche and Follis, "A moment with me before you go." The woman started, for she thought of one thing, and Garouche started, for he thought of another, the siege of Beauregard and the killing of young Marmette. But they followed the Baron to his chamber. Coming in, he shut the door on them. Then he turned to Garouche. "You will accept the roof and bed of Beauregard tonight, my man," he said, "and come to me here at 9 tomorrow morning." Garouche stared hard for an instant. "Stay here?" said Garouche. "Follis and me stay here, in the manor, Monsieur le Baron?" "Here, even here, Garouche. So good night to you," said the Baron. Garouche turned towards the girl. "Then come, Follis," he said, and reached out his hand. "Your room shall be shown you at once," the Baron added softly. "The lady's at her pleasure." Then a cry burst from Garouche, and he sprang forward, but the Baron waved him back. "Stand off," he said, "and let the lady choose between us." "She is my wife," said Garouche. "I am your seigneur," said the other, "and there is more than that," he went on, "for damn me, she is too fine stuff for you, and the church shall untie what she has tied today." At that Follis fainted, and the Baron caught her as she fell. He laid her on a couch, keeping an eye on Garouche the while. "Loose her gown," he said, "while I get brandy." Then he turned to the cupboard, poured liquor, and came over. Garouche had her dress open at the neck and bosom, and was staring at something on her breast. The Baron saw also, stooped with a strange sound in his throat, and picked it up. "My glove," he said, "and on her wedding day." He pointed. "There on the table is its mate, fished this morning from my hunting coat, a pair the governor gave me. You see, man, you see her choice." At that he stooped and put some brandy to her lips. Garouche drew back, sick and numb. He did nothing, only stared. Follis came to herself soon, and when she felt her dress open, gave a cry. Garouche could have killed her then, when he saw her shudder from him, as if afraid, over towards the Baron, who held the glove in his hand and said, "See, Garouche, you had better go. In the next room they will tell you where to sleep. Tomorrow, as I said, you will meet me here. We shall have things to say, you and I." Ah, that Baron, he had a queer mind, but in truth he loves a woman, as you shall see. Garouche got up without a word, went to the door and opened it, the eyes of the Baron and the woman following him, for there was a devil in his eye. In the other room there were men waiting, and he was taken to a chamber and locked in. You can guess what that night must have been to him. "What was it to the Baron and Follis?" asked Medallion. "Monsieur, what do you think?" Beauregard had never had an eye for women, loving his hounds, fighting, quarreling, doing wild, strong things. So all at once he was face to face with a woman who has the look of love in her face, who was young and fine of body, so the abbé said, and was walking to marriage, at her father's will and against her own, carrying the Baron's glove in her bosom. What should Beauregard do? But no, no, monsieur, not as you think, not quite. Wild, with a bit in his teeth, yes, but at heart, well, here was the one woman for him. He knew it all in a minute, and he would have her once and for all, until death should come their way. And so he said to her, as he raised her, she drawing back afraid, her heart hungering for him, yet fear in her eyes, and her fingers trembling as she softly pushed him from her. You see, she did not quite know what was in his heart. She was the daughter of a tenant vassal, who had lived in the family of the Grand Seigneur in her youth, the friend of his child, that was all, and that was where she got her manners and her mind. She got on her feet and said, "Monsieur le Baron, you will let me go to my husband. I cannot stay here. Oh, you are great. You are noble. You would not make me sorry, make me hate myself and you. I have only one thing in the world of any price. You would not steal my happiness." He looked at her steadily in the eyes and said, "Will it make you happy to go to Garouche?" She raised her hands and wrung them. "God knows I am his wife," she said helplessly, "and he loves me." "And God knows, said the Baron, it is all a question of whether one shall feed and two go hungry, or two gather and one have the stubble. Shall not he stand in the stubble? What has he done to merit you? What would he do? You are for the master, not the man, for love, not the feeding on, for the manor house and the hunt, not the cottage and the loom." She broke into tears, her heart thumping in her throat. "I am for what the church did for me this day," she said. "Oh, sir, I pray you, forgive me and let me go. Do not punish me, but forgive me and let me go. I was wicked to wear your glove, wicked, wicked." "But no," was his reply. "I shall not forgive you so good a deed, and you shall not go. And what the church did for you this day, she shall undo, by all the saints she shall. You came sailing into my heart this hour past on a strong wind, and you shall not slide out on an ebb tide. I have you here as your seigneur, but I have you here as a man who will—" He sat down by her at that point and whispered softly in her ear, at which she gave a little cry which had both gladness and pain. "Surely even that," he said, catching her to his breast. And the Baron of Beaugard never broke his word. What should be her reply? Does not a woman, when she truly loves, always believe? Is that the great sign? She slid to her knees and dropped her head into the hollow of his arm. "I do not understand these things," she said, "but I know that the other was death, and this is life. And yet I know, too, for my heart says so, that the end will be death." "Tut, tut, my flower, my wild rose," he said. "Of course the end of all is death, but we will go a-Maying first, come October, and let the world break over us when it must. We are for Maying now, my rose of all the world." It was as if he meant more than he said, as if he saw what would come in that October, which all New France never forgot, when, as he said, the world broke over them. The next morning the Baron called Garouche to him. The man was like some mad buck harried by the hounds, and he gnashed his teeth behind his shut lips. The Baron eyed him curiously, yet kindly too, as well he might, for when was ever man to hear such a speech as came to Garouche the morning after his marriage? "Garouche," the Baron said, having waved his men away, "as you see, the lady made her choice, and forever. You and she have said your last farewell in this world, for the wife of the Baron of Beaugard can have nothing to say to Garouche the soldier." At that Garouche snarled out, "The wife of the Baron of Beaugard? That is a lie to shame all hell." The Baron wound the lash of a riding-whip round and round his fingers quietly, and said, "It is no lie, my man, but the truth." Garouche eyed him savagely and growled, "The church made her my wife yesterday, and you who had all, you with your money and place, which could get all easy, you take the one thing I have? You, the Grand Seigneur, are only a common robber. Ah, Jésus, if you would but fight me." The Baron, very calm, said, "First, Garouche, the lady was only your wife by a form, which the church shall set aside. It could never have been a true marriage. Secondly, it is no stealing to take from you what you did not have. I took what was mine. Remember the glove? For the rest, to fight you? No, my churl, you know that's impossible. You may shoot me from behind a tree or a rock, but swording with you, come, a pretty gossip for the court. Then why wish a fight? Where would you be as you stood before me? You." The Baron stretched himself up and smiled down at Garouche. "You have your life, man. Take it and go to the farthest corner of New France, and show not your face here again. If I find you ever again in Beauregard, I will have you whipped from parish to parish. Here is money for you, good gold coins. Take them and go." Garouche got still and cold as stone. He said in a low, harsh voice, "Monsieur le Baron, you are a common thief, a wolf, a snake. Such men as you come lower than Judas. As God has an eye to see, you shall pay all one day. I do not fear you, nor your men, nor your gallows. You are a jackal, and the woman has a filthy heart, a ditch of shame." The Baron drew up his arm like lightning, and the lash of his whip came singing across Garouche's pale face. Where it passed, a red welt rose, but the man never stirred. The arm came up again, but a voice behind the Baron said, "Ah, no, not again." There stood Follis. Both men looked at her. "I have heard Garouche," she said. "He does not judge me right. My heart is no filthy ditch of shame. But it was breaking when I came from the altar with him yesterday. Yet I would have been a true wife to him after all. A ditch of shame? Ah, Garouche, you have said you loved me, and that nothing could change you." The Baron said to her, "Why have you come, Follis? I forbade you." "Oh, my lord," she answered, "I feared for you both. When men go mad because of women, a devil enters into them." The Baron, taking her hand, said, "Permit me," and he led her to the door for her to pass out. She looked back sadly at Garouche, standing for a minute very still. Then Garouche said, "I command you, come with me. You are my wife." She did not reply, but shook her head at him. Then he spoke out high and fierce. "May no child be born to you. May a curse fall on you. May your field be barren, and your horses and cattle die. May you never see nor hear good things. May the waters leave their courses to drown you, and the hills their bases to bury you, and no hand lay you in decent graves." The woman put her hand to her ears and gave a little cry, and the Baron pushed her gently on and closed the door after her. Then he turned on Garouche. "Have you said all you wish?" he asked. "For if not, say on, and then go, and go so far that you cannot see the sky that covers Beauregard. We are even now. We can cry quits. But that I have a little injured you, you should be done for instantly. But hear me, if I ever see you again, my gallows shall end you straight. Your tongue has been gross before the mistress of this manor. I will have it torn out if it so much as syllables her name to me or to the world again. She is dead to you. Go, and go forever." He put a bag of money on the table, but Garouche turned away from it, and without a word left the room, and the house, and the parish, and said nothing to any man of the evils that had come to him. But what talk was there, and what dreadful things were said at first, that Garouche had sold his wife to the Baron, that he had been killed and his wife taken, that the Baron kept him a prisoner in a cellar under the manor house, and all the time there was Follis with the Baron, very quiet and sweet and fine to see, and going to chapel every day and to mass on Sundays, which no one could understand, any more than they could see why she should be called the Baroness of Beaugard, for had they not all seen her married to Garouche? And there were many people who thought her vile, yet truly at heart she was not so, not at all. Then it was said that there was to be a new marriage, that the church would let it be so, doing and undoing and doing again. But the weeks and the months went by, and it was never done. For powerful as the Baron was, Bigot, the intendant, was powerful also, and fought the thing with all his might. The Baron went to Quebec to see the bishop and the governor, and though promises were made, nothing was done. It must go to the king and then to the pope, and from the pope to the king again, and so on. And the months and the years went by as they waited, and with them came no child to the manor house of Beauregard. That was the only sad thing, that and the waiting, so far as man could see. For never were man and woman truer to each other than these, and never was a lady of the manor kinder to the poor, or a lord freer of hand to his vassals. He would bluster sometimes, and string a peasant up by the heels, but his gallows were never used, and what was much in the minds of the people, the curé did not refuse the woman the sacrament. At last the Baron, fierce because he knew that Bigot was the cause of the great delay, so that he might not call Follis his wife, seized a transport on the river which had been sent to brutally levy upon a poor gentleman, and when Bigot's men resisted, shot them down. Then Bigot sent against Beauregard a company of artillery and some soldiers of the line. The guns were placed on a hill looking down on the manor house across the little river. In the evenings the cannons arrived, and in the morning the fight was to begin. The guns were loaded, and everything was ready. At the manor all was making ready also, and the Baron had no fear. But Follis's heart was heavy, she knew not why. "Eugene," she said, "if anything should happen—" "Nonsense, my Follis," he answered. "What should happen?" If you were taken, were killed," she said. "Nonsense, my Rose," he said again. "I shall not be killed, but if I were, you should be at peace here." "Ah, no, no," she said. "Never. Life to me is only possible with you. I have had nothing but you, none of those things which give peace to other women. None. But I have been very happy. Oh, yes, very happy. And God forgive me, Eugene, I cannot regret, and I never have. But it has been always and always my prayer that when you die, I may die with you at the same moment, for I cannot live without you. And besides, I would like to go to the good God with you to speak for us both, for, oh, I loved you, and I love you still, my husband, my adored." He stooped, he was so big, and she but of middle height, kissed her, and said, "See, my Follis, I am of the same mind. We have been happy in life, and we could well be happy in death together." So they sat long, long into the night, and talked to each other of the days they had passed together, of cheerful things, she trying to comfort herself, and he trying to bring smiles to her lips. At last they said good night, and he lay down in his clothes, and after a few moments she was sleeping like a child. But he could not sleep, for he lay thinking of her and of her life, how she had come from humble things and fitted in with the highest. At last, at break of day, he arose and went outside. He looked up at the hill where Bigot's 2 guns were. Men were already stirring there. One man was standing beside the gun, and another not far behind. Of course, the Baron could not know that the man behind the gunner said, "Yes, you may open the dance with an early salute." And the Baron smiled up boldly at the hill, and went into the house, and stole to the bed of his wife to kiss her before he began the day's fighting. He looked at her a moment, standing over her, and then stooped and softly put his lips to hers. At that moment the gunner up on the hill used the match, and an awful thing happened. With a loud roar, the whole hillside of rock and gravel and sand split down, not 10 feet in front of the gun, moved with horrible swiftness upon the river, filled its bed, turned it from its course, and, sweeping on, swallowed the manor house of Beauregard. There had been a crack in the hill. The water of the river had sapped its foundations. It needed only this shock to send it down. And so, as the woman wished, the same hour for herself and the man. And when at last their prison was opened by the hands of Bigot's men, they were found cheek to cheek, bound in the sacred marriage of death. But another had gone the same road, for at the awful moment, beside the bursting gun, the dying gunner, Garouche, lifted up his head, saw the loose travelling hill, and said with his last breath, "The waters drown them, and the hills bury them, and—" He had his way with them, and after that perhaps the great God had his way with him. Perhaps. End of section 23, The Baron of Beauregard.
Section 24 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eva Davis. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. The Golden Pipes. They hung all bronzed and shining on the side of Margath Mountain, the tall and perfect pipes of the organ, which was played by some son of God when the world was young. At least, Hepnon the cripple said this was so when he was but a child. And when he got older, he said that even now a golden music came from the pipes at sunrise and sunset. And no one laughed at Hepnon, for you could not look into the dark, warm eyes, dilating with his fancies, nor see the transparent temper of his face, the look of the dreamer over all, without believing him, and reproving your own judgment. You felt that he had traveled ways you could never travel, that he had had dreams beyond you, that his fanciful spirit had had adventures you would give years of your dull life to know. And yet he was not made only as women are made, fragile and trembling in his nerves, for he was strong of arm, and there was no place in the hills to be climbed by a venturesome man, which he could not climb with crutch and shriveled leg. And he was a gallant horseman, riding with his knees on one foot in stirrup, his crutch slung behind him. It may be that was why rough men listened to his fancies about the golden pipes. Indeed, they would go out at sunrise and look across to where the pipes hung, taking the rosy glory of the morning, and steal away alone at sunset, and in some lonely spot lean out towards the framing instrument to hear if any music rose from them. The legend that one of the mighty men of the Kimash Hills came here to play, with invisible hands, the music of the first years of the world, became a truth, though a truth that none could prove. And by, no man ever travelled the valley without taking off his hat as he passed the golden pipes,
so had a cripple with his whimsies worked upon the land. Then, too, perhaps, his music had to do with it. As a child he had only a poor concertina, but by it he drew the traveller and the mountaineer and the worker in the valley to him like a magnet. Some touch of the mysterious, some sweet fantastical melody in all he played charmed them, even when he gave them old familiar airs. From the concertina he passed to the violin, and his skill and mastery over his followers grew. And then there came a notable day when up over 1,000 miles of country a melodeon was brought him. Then a wanderer, a minstrel outcast from a far country, taking refuge in those hills, taught him. And there was one long year of loving labour together, and merry whisperings between the two, and secret drawings, and worship of the golden pipes. And then the minstrel died, and left Hepnon alone. And now they said that Hepnon tried to coax out of the old melodeon the music of the golden pipes. But a look of sorrow grew upon his face, and stayed for many months. Then there came a change, and he went into the woods, and began working there in the perfect summer weather. And the tale went abroad that he was building an organ, so that he might play for all who came the music he heard on the golden pipes. For they had ravished his ear since childhood, and now he must know the wonderful melodies all by heart, they said. With consummate patience, Hepnon dried the wood and fashioned it into long, tuneful tubes, beating out soft metal got from the forge in the valley to case the lips of them, tanning the leather for the bellows, stretching it, and exposing all his work to the sun of early morning, which gave every fibre and valve a rich sweetness, like a sound fruit of autumn. People also said that he set all the pieces out at sunrise and sunset, that the tone of the golden pipes might pass into them, so that when the organ was built, each part should be saturated with such melody as it had drawn in, according to its temper and its fibre. So the building of the organ went on, and a year passed, and then another, and it was summer again. And soon Hepnon began to build also, while yet it was sweet weather, a home for his organ, a tall nest of cedar added to his father's house. And in it every piece of wood and every board had been made ready by his own hands, and set in the sun and dried slowly to a healthy soundness. And he used no nails of metal, but wooden pins of the ironwood or hickory tree, and it was all polished, and there was no paint or varnish anywhere, and when you spoke in this nest, your voice sounded pure and strong. At last the time came when, piece by piece, the organ was set up in its home, and as the days and weeks went by, and autumn drew to winter, and the music of the golden pipes stole down the flumes of snow to their ardent lover, and spring came with its sap, and small purple blossoms, and yellow apples of mandrake, and summer stole on luxurious and dry, the face of Hepnon became thinner and thinner. A strange, deep light shone in his eyes, and all his person seemed to exhale a kind of glow. He ceased to ride, to climb, to lift weights with his strong arms as he had, poor cripple, been once so proud to do. A delicacy came upon him, and more he withdrew himself to his organ, and to those lofty and lonely places where he could see, and hear, the golden pipes boom softly over the valley. At last it was all done, even to the fine carved stool of cedar whereon he should sit when he played his organ. Never yet had he done more than sound each note as he made it, trying it, softening it by tender devices with the wood. But now the hour is come when he should gather down the soul of the golden pipes to his fingers, and give to the ears of the world the song of the morning stars, the music of Jubal and his comrades, the affluent melody to which the sons of men, in the first days, paced the world and time with the thoughts of God. For days he lived alone in the cedar house, and who may know what he was doing, dreaming, listening, or praying? Then the word went through the valley and the hills that one evening he would play for all who came. and that day was Toussaint, or the Feast of All Souls. So they came, both old and young, and they did not enter the house, but waited outside upon the mossy rocks, or sat among the trees, and watched the heavy sun roll down and the golden pipes flame in the light of evening. Far beneath in the valley the water ran lightly on, but there came no sound from it, none from anywhere, only a general pervasive murmur quieting to the heart. Now they heard a note coming from the organ, a soft, low sound that seemed to rise out of the good earth and mingle with the vibrant air, the song of birds, the whisper of trees, and the murmuring water. Then came another and another note, then chords, and chords upon these, and by rolling tides of melody, until, as it seemed to the listeners, the air ached with the incomparable song, and men and women wept, and children hid their heads in the laps of their mothers, and young men and maidens dreamed dreams never to be forgotten. For 1 short hour the music went on, then twilight came. Presently the sounds grew fainter and exquisitely painful, and now a low sob seemed to pass through all the heart of the organ. And then silence fell, and in the sacred pause Hepnon came out among them all, pale and desolate. He looked at them a minute most sadly, and then, lifting up his arms towards the golden pipes, now hidden in the dusk, he cried low and brokenly, "Oh, my God, give me back my dream." Then his crutch seemed to give way beneath him, and he sank upon the ground, faint and gasping. They raised him up, and women and men whispered in his ear, "Ah, the beautiful, beautiful music, Hepnon." But he only said, "Oh, my God, oh, my God, give me back my dream." When he had said it thrice, he turned his face to where his organ was in the cedar house, and then his eyes closed, and he fell asleep, and they could not wake him. But at sunrise the next morning a shiver passed through him, and then a cold quiet stole over him, and Hepnon and the music of the golden pipes departed from the Vosges hills, and came again no more. End of section 24.
Section 25 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nemo. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac, by Gilbert Parker. The Guardian of the Fire. Height unto height answereth knowledge. His was the first watch, the farthest fire. For Shaknon Hill towered above the great gulf, and looked back also over 30 leagues of country towards the great city. There came a time again when all the land was threatened. From sovereign lands far off, 2 fleets were sailing hard to reach the wide basin before the walled city, the one to save, the other to destroy. If Tinoir, the guardian of the fire, should sight the destroying fleet, he must light 2 fires on Shaknon Hill, and then, at the edge of the wide basin, in a treacherous channel, the people would send out fire rafts to burn the ships of the foe. 5 times in the past had Tinoir been the guardian of the fire, and 5 times had the people praised him, but praise and his scanty wage were all he got. The hut in which he lived with his wife on another hill, 10 miles from Shaknon, had but 2 rooms, and their little farm and the garden gave them only enough to live, no more. Elsewhere there was good land in abundance, But it had been said years ago to Tinoir by the great men that he should live not far from Shaknon, so that in times of peril he might guard the fire and be the sentinel for all the people. Perhaps Tinoir was too dull to see that he was giving all and getting naught, that while he waited and watched he was always poor, and also was getting old. There was no house or home within 50 miles of them, and only now and then some wandering Indians lifted the latch and drew in beside their hearth, or a good priest with a soul of love for others came and said mass in the room where a little Calvary had been put up. 2 children had come and gone, and Tinoir and Dalice had dug their graves and put them in a warm nest of maple leaves, and afterwards lived upon the memories of them. But after these 2 children came no more, and Tinoir and Dalice grew close and closer to each other, coming to look alike in face as they had long been alike in mind and feeling. None ever lived nearer to nature than they, and wild things grew to be their friends, so that you might see Dalice at her door, tossing crumbs with one hand to birds, and with the other bits of meat to foxes, martens, and wild dogs that came and went unharmed by them. Tinoir shot no wild animals for profit, only for food, and for skins and furs to wear. Because of this he was laughed at by all who knew, save the priest of Saint Sulpice, who on Easter Day, when the little man came yearly to Mass over 200 miles of country, praised him to his people and made much of him, though Tinoir was not vain enough to see it. When word came down the river and up over the hills to Tinoir that war was come, and that he must go to watch for the hostile fleet and for the friendly fleet as well, he made no murmur, though it was the time of harvest, and Dalice had had a sickness from which she was not yet recovered. "Go, my Tinoir," said Dalice with a little smile, "and I will reap the grain. If your eyes are sharp, you shall see my bright sickle moving in the sun." "There is the churning of the milk too, Dalice," answered Tinoir. "You are not strong, and sometimes the butter comes slow, and there's the milking also." "Strength is coming to me fast, Tinoir," she said, and drew herself up, but her dress lay almost flat on her bosom. Tinoir took her arm and felt it above the elbow. "It is like the muscle of a little child," he said. "But I will drink those bottles of red wine the governor sent the last time you watched the fire on Shaknon," she said, brightening up and trying to cheer him. He nodded, for he saw what she was trying to do, and said, "And a little of the gentian and orange root 3 times a day, Dalice?" After arranging for certain signs by little fires, which they were to light upon the hills, and so speak with each other, they said, "Good day, Dalice," and "Good day, Tinoir," drank a glass of the red wine, and added, "Thank the good God." Then Tinoir wiped his mouth with his sleeve and went away, leaving Dalice with a broken glass at her feet, and a look in her eyes which it is well that Tinoir did not see. But as he went, he was thinking how, the night before, Dalice had lain with her arm around his neck hour after hour as she slept, as she did before they ever had a child. Not even in her sleep she kissed him as she used to kiss him before he brought her away from the parish of St. Genevieve to be his wife. And the more he thought about it, the happier he became, and more than once he stopped and shook his head in pleased retrospection. And Dalice thought of it too as she hung over the churn, her face drawn and tired and shining with sweat, and she shook her head, and tears came into her eyes, for she saw further into things than Tinoir. And once, as she passed his coat on the wall, she rubbed it softly with her hand, as she might his curly head when he lay beside her. From Shaknon, Tinoir watched, but of course he could never see her bright sickle shining, and he could not know whether her dress still hung loose upon her breast, or whether the flesh of her arms was still like a child's. If all was well with Dalice, a little fire should be lighted at the house door just at the going down of the sun, and it should be at once put out. If she were ill, a fire should be lit and then put out 2 hours after sundown. If she should be ill beyond any help, this fire should burn on till it went out. Day after day, Tinoir, as he watched for the coming fleet, saw the fire lit at sundown and then put out. But one night the fire did not come till 2 hours after sundown, and it was put out at once. He fretted much, and he prayed that Dalice might be better, and he kept to his post, looking for the fleet of the foe. Evening after evening was this other fire lighted and then put out at once, and a great longing came to him to leave this guarding of the fire and go to her. For half a day, he said, just for half a day. But in that half day the fleet might pass, and then it would be said that Tinoir had betrayed his country. At last sleep left him, and he fought a demon night and day, and always he remembered Dalice's arm about his neck, and her kisses that last night they were together. Twice he started away from his post to go to her, but before he had gone 100 paces, he came back. At last one afternoon he saw ships not far off, rounding the great cape in the gulf, and after a time, at sunset, he knew by their shape it was the fleet of the foe, and so he lighted his great fires, and they were answered leagues away towards the city by another beacon. 2 hours after sunset of this day, the fire in front of Tinoir's home was lighted, and was not put out, and Tinoir sat and watched it till it died away. So he lay in the light of his own great war fire till morning, for he could not travel at night, and then, his duty over, he went back to his home. He found Dalice lying beside the ashes of her fire, past hearing all he said in her ear, unheeding the kiss he set upon her lips. 2 nights afterwards, coming back from laying her beside her children, he saw a great light in the sky towards the city as of a huge fire. When the courier came to him, bearing the governor's message and the praise of the people, and told of the enemy's fleet destroyed by the fire rafts, he stared at the man, then turned his head to a place where a pine cross showed against the green grass, and said, "Dalice, my wife, is dead." "You have saved your country, Tinoir," answered the courier kindly. "What is that to me?" he said, and fondled the rosary Dalice used to carry when she lived, and he would speak to the man no more. End of section 25. Section 26 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nemo. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac, by Gilbert Parker. By that place called Peradventure. By that place called Peradventure, in the Voshti Hills, dwelt Golgothar the strong man, who, it was said, could break an iron pot with a blow, or pull a tall sapling from the ground. "If I had 100 men so strong," said Golgothar, "I would go and conquer Nooni, the city of our foes." Because he had not the 100 men, he did not go, and Nooni still sent insults to the country of Golgothar, and none could travel safe between the capitals, and Golgothar was sorry. "If I had 100 men so strong," said Golgothar, "I would build a dike to keep the floods back from the people crowded on the lowlands." Because he had not the 100 men, now and again the floods came down and swept the poor folk out to sea, or laid low their habitations, and Golgothar pitied them. "If I had 100 men so strong," said Golgothar, "I would clear the wild boar from the forest, that the children should not fear to play among the trees." Because he had not the 100 men, the graves of children multiplied, and countless mothers sat by empty beds and mourned, and Golgothar put his head between his knees in trouble for them. "If I had 100 men so strong," said Golgothar, "I would with great stones mend the broken pier, and the bridge between the islands should not fall." Because he had not the 100 men, at last the bridge gave way, and a legion of the king's army were carried to the whirlpool, where they fought in vain, and Golgothar made a feast of remembrance to them, and tears dripped on his beard when he said, "Hail and farewell." "If I had 100 men so strong," said Golgothar, "I would go against the walls of chains our rebels built, and break them one by one." Because he had not the 100 men, the chain walls blocked the only pass between the hills, and so cut in two the kingdom, and they who pined for corn went wanting, and they who wished for fish went hungry. And Golgothar, brooding, said his heart bled for his country. "If I had 100 men so strong," said Golgothar, "I would go among the 1,000 brigands of Mirnan, and bring them again the beloved daughter of our city." Because he had not the 100 men, the beloved lady languished in her prison, for the brigands asked as ransom the city of Talgon, which they hated, and Golgothar carried in his breast a stone image she had given him, and for very grief let no man speak her name before him. "If I had 100 men so strong," said Golgothar one day, standing on a great point of land and looking down the valley. As he said it, he heard a laugh, and looking down, he saw Sapphire, or Laugh of the Hills, as she was called. A long staff of ironwood was in her hands, with which she jumped the dikes and streams and rocky fissures. In her breast were yellow roses, and there was a tuft of pretty feathers in her hair. She reached up and touched him on the breast with her staff. Then she laughed again, and sang a snatch of song in mockery. "I am a king, I have no crown, I have no throne to sit in." "Pull me up, boy," she said. She wound a leg about the staff, and taking hold, he drew her up as if she had been a feather. "If I had 100 mouths, I would kiss you for that," she said, still mocking. "But having only one, I'll give it to the cat and weep for Golgothar." "Silly jade," he said, and turned towards his tent. As they passed a slippery and dangerous place, where was one strong solitary tree, she suddenly threw a noose over him, drew it fast, and sprang far out over the precipice into the air. Even as she did so, he jumped behind the tree and clasped it, else on the slippery place he would have gone over with her. the rope came taut, and presently he drew her up again to safety. And while she laughed at him and mocked him, he held her tight under his arm, and carried her to his lodge, where he let her go. "Why did you do it, devil's madcap?" he said. "Why didn't you wait for the 100 men so strong?" she laughed. "Why did you jump behind the tree?" "If I had 100 men, hi-yo, I would buy my corn for a penny a gill. If I had 100 men or so, I would dig a grave for the maid of the hill, hi-yo." He did not answer her, but stirred the soup in the pot and tasted it, and hung a great piece of meat over the fire. Then he sat down, and only once did he show anger as she mocked him, and that was when she thrust her hand into his breast, took out the little stone image, and said, "If a little stone god had 100 hearts, would a little stone goddess trust in one?" Then she made as if she would throw it into the fire, but he caught her hand and crushed it, so that she cried out for pain and anger, and said, "Brute of iron, go break the post in the brigand's prison house, but leave a poor girl's wrist alone. If I had 100 men," she added, mocking wildly again, and then, springing at him, put her 2 thumbs at the corner of his eyes, and cried, "Stir a hand, and out they will come, your eyes for my bones." He did not stir till her fury was gone. Then he made her sit down and eat with him, and afterwards she said softly to him, and without a laugh, "Why should the people say, 'Golgothar is our shame, for he has great strength, and yet he does nothing but throw great stones for sport into the sea?'" He had the simple mind of a child, and he listened to her patiently, and at last got up and began preparing for a journey, cleaning all his weapons and gathering them together. She understood him, and she said, with a little laugh like music, "One strong man is better than 100. A little key will open a great door easier than 100 hammers. What is the strength of 100 bullocks without this?" she added, tapping him on the forehead. Then they sat down and talked together quietly for a long time, and at sunset she saw him start away upon great errands. Before 2 years had gone, Nooni, the city of their foes, was taken. The chain wall of the rebels opened to the fish and corn of the poor. The children wandered in the forest without fear of wild boars. The dike was built to save the people in the lowlands, and Golgothar carried to the castle the king had given him the daughter of the city, freed from Mirnan. "If Golgothar had 100 wives," said a voice to the strong man as he entered the castle gates. Looking up, he saw Sapphire. He stretched out his hand to her in joy and friendship. "I would not be one of them," she added with a mocking laugh, as she dropped from the wall, leaped the moat by the help of her staff, and danced away laughing. There are those who say, however, that tears fell down her cheeks as she laughed. End of section 26.
Section 27 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eva Davis. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. The Singing of the Bees. Mother, didst thou not say thy prayers last night? Twice, my child. Once before the little shrine, and once beside my bed. Is it not so? It is so, my Fanchon. What hast thou in thy mind? Thou didst pray that the storm die in the hills and the flood cease, and that my father come before it was again the hour of prayer. It is now the hour. Canst thou not hear the storm and the wash of the flood? And my father does not come. My Fanchon, God is good. When thou wast asleep, I rose from my bed, and in the dark I kissed the feet of him on the little Calvary, and I did not speak, but in my heart I called. What didst thou call, my child? I called to my father, Come back, come back. Thou shouldst have called to God, my Fanchon. I loved my father, and I called to him. Thou shouldst love God. I knew my father first. If God loved thee, he would answer thy prayer. Dost thou not hear the cracking of the cedar trees and the cry of the wolves? They are afraid. All day and all night the rain and wind come down, and the birds and the wildfowl have no peace. I kissed his feet, and my throat was full of tears, but I called in my heart. Yet the storm and the dark stay, and my father does not come. Let us be patient, my Fanchon. He went to guide the priest across the hills. Why does not God guide him back? My Fanchon, let us be patient. The priest was young, and my father has grey hair. Wilt thou not be patient, my child? He filled the knapsack of the priest with food better than his own, and thou didst not see it, put money in his hand. My own, the storm may pass. He told the priest to think upon our home as a little nest God set up here for such as he. There are places of shelter in the hills for thy father, my Fanchon. And when the priest prayed that thou may bring us safely to this place where we would go, my father said so softly, We beseech thee to hear us, good Lord. My Fanchon, thy father hath gone this trail many times. The prayer was for the out trail, not the in trail, my mother. Nay, I do not understand thee. A swarm of bees came singing through the room last night, my mother. It was dark, and I could not see, but there was a sweet smell, and I heard the voices. My child, thou art tired with watching, and thy mind is full of fancies. Thou must sleep. I am tired of watching. Through the singing of the bees as they passed over my bed, I heard my father's voice. I could not hear the words, they seemed so far away, like the voices of the bees. And I did not cry out, for the tears were in my throat. After a moment the room was so still that it made my heart ache. Oh, my Fanchon, my child, thou dost break my heart. Dost thou not know the holy words? And their souls do pass like singing bees, where no man may follow. These are they whom God gathereth out of the whirlwind and the desert, and bringeth home in a goodly swarm. Night drew close to the earth, and as suddenly as a sluice gate drops and holds back a flood, the storm ceased. Along the crest of the hills there slowly grew a line of light, and then the serene moon came up and on, persistent to give the earth love where it had had punishment. Divers flocks of clouds, camp followers of the storm, could not abash her, but once she drew shrinking back behind a slow troop of them, for down at the bottom of a gorge lay a mountaineer, face upward and unmoving, as he had lain since a rock loosened beneath him, and the depths swallowed him. If he had had ears to hear, he would have answered the soft, bitter cries which rose from a hut on the Vosges hills above him. Michele, Michele, art thou gone? Come back, O my father, come back. But perhaps it did avail that there were lighted candles before a little shrine, and that a mother, in her darkness, kissed the feet of one on a Calvary. End of section 27. Section 28 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eva Davis. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. There was a little city. It lay between the mountains and the sea, and a river ran down past it, carrying its good and ill news to a Pacific shore, and out upon soft winds travelling lazily to the scarlet east. All white and a tempered red, it nestled in a valley with other valleys on lower steps, which seemed as if built by the gods, that they might travel easily from the white-topped mountains, Margath, Shaknon, and the rest, to wash their feet in the sea. In the summer a hot but gracious mistiness softened the green of the valleys, the varying colours of the hills, the blue of the river, the sharp outlines of the cliffs. Along the high shelf of the mountain, mule trains travelled like a procession seen in dreams, slow, hazy, graven, yet moving, a part of the ancient hills themselves. Upon the river great rafts, manned with scarlet-vested crews, swerved and swam, guided by the gigantic oars which needed 5 men to lift and sway. Argonauts they from the sweet-smelling forests to the salt-smelling main. In winter, the little city lay still under a coverlet of pure white, with the mists from the river and the great falls above frozen upon the trees, clothing them as graciously as with white samite, so that far as eye could see there was a heavenly purity upon all, covering every mean and distorted thing. There were days when no wind stirred anywhere, and the gorgeous sun made the little city and all the land round about a pretty silver kingdom, where Oberon and his courtiers might have danced and been glad. Often, too, you could hear a distant woodcutter's axe make a pleasant song in the air, and the woodcutter himself, as the hickory and steel swung in a shining half-circle to the bowl of balsam, was clad in the bright livery of frost, his breath issuing in grey smoke like life itself, mystic and peculiar, man, axe, tree, and breath, one common being. And when, by and by, the woodcutter added a song of his own to the song his axe made, the illusion was not lost, but rather heightened, for it, too, was part of the unassuming pride of nature, childlike in its simplicity, primeval in its suggestion and expression. The song had a soft monotony, swinging backwards and forwards to the waving axe like the pendulum of a clock. It began with a low humming, as one could think man-made before he heard the voice which taught him how to speak. And then came the words, "None shall stand in the way of the Lord of the earth, of the rivers and trees, of the cattle and fields and vines. Whew. Here shall I build me my cedar home, a city with gates, a road to the sea, for I am the Lord of the earth. Hew, hew. Hew, and the sap of the tree shall be yours, and your bones shall be strong, shall be yours, and your heart shall rejoice, shall be yours, and the city be yours, and the key of its gates be the key of the home where your little ones dwell. Hew, and be strong, hew, and rejoice, for man is the Lord of the earth, and God is the Lord over all." And so long as the little city stands, will this same woodcutter's name and history stand also. He had camped where it stood now, when nothing was there save the wild duck in the reeds, the antelopes upon the hills, and all manner of furred and feathered things, and it all was his. He had seen the yellow flashes of gold in the stream called Pippi, and he had not gathered it, for his life was simple, and he was young enough to cherish in his heart the love of the open world, beyond the desire of cities and the stir of the marketplace. In those days there was not a line in his face, not an angle in his body, all smoothly rounded and lithe and alert, like him that was called the young lion of Dedan. Day by day he drank in the wisdom of the hills and the valleys, and he wrote upon the dried barks of trees the thoughts that came as he lay upon the bearskin in his tent, or cooled his hands and feet, of a hot summer day, in the moist, sandy earth, and watched the master of the deer lead his cohorts down the passes of the hills. But by and by, mule trains began to crawl along the ledges of Margath Mountain, and over Shaknon came adventurers, and after them, wandering men seeking a new home, women and children coming also. But when these came, he had passed the springtime of his years, and had grown fixed in the love of the valley, where his sole visitors had been passing tribes of Indians, who knew his moods and trespassed not at all on his domain. The adventurers hungered for the gold in the rivers, and they made it one long washing trough, where the disease that afflicted them passed on from man to man like poison down a sewer. Then the little city grew, and with the search for gold came other seekings and findings and toilings, and men who came, as one stops at an inn to feed, stayed to make their home, and women made the valley cheerful, and children were born, and the pride of the place was as great as that of some village of the crimson East, where every man has ancestors to Mahomet and beyond. And he, Felion, who had been lord and master of the valley, worked with them, but did not seek for riches, and more often drew away into the hills to find some newer place unspoiled by man. But again and again he returned, for no fire is like the old fire, and no trail like the old trail. And at last it seemed as if he had driven his tent peg in the Pippi Valley forever. For from among the women who came he chose one comely and wise and kind, and for 5 years the world grew older, and Felion did not know it. When he danced his little daughter on his knee, he felt that he had found a new world. But a day came when trouble fell upon the little city, for of a sudden the reef of gold was lost, and the great crushing mills stood idle, and the sound of the hammers was stayed. And they came to Felion, because in his youth he had been of the best of the schoolmen, and he got up from his misery. Only the day before his wife had taken a great and lonely journey to that country which welcomes, but never yields again. And leaving his little child behind, he went down to the mines. And in 3 days they found the reef once more, for it had curved like the hook of a sickle, and the first arc of the yellow circle had dropped down into the bowels of the earth. And so he saved the little city from disaster, and the people blessed him at the moment, and the years went on. Then there came a time when the little city was threatened with a woeful flood, because of a breaking flume, but by a simple and wise device Felion stayed the danger. And again the people blessed him, and the years went on. By and by an awful peril came, for 20 children had set a great raft loose upon the river, and they drifted down towards the rapids in the sight of the people. And mothers and helpless fathers wrung their hands, for on the swift tide no boat could reach them, and none could intercept the raft. But Felion, seeing, ran out upon the girders of a bridge that was being builded, and there before them all, as the raft passed under, he let himself fall, breaking his leg as he dropped among the timbers of the forepart of the raft, for the children were all gathered at the back, where the great oars lay motionless, one dragging in the water behind. Felion drew himself over to the huge oar, and with the strength of 5 men, while the people watched and prayed, he kept the raft straight for the great slide, else it had gone over the dam and been lost, and all that were thereon. A mile below the raft was brought to shore, and again the people said that Felion had saved the little city from disaster. And they blessed him for the moment, and the years went on. Felion's daughter grew towards womanhood, and her beauty was great, and she was welcome everywhere in the valley, the people speaking well of her for her own sake. But at last a time came when of the men of the valley one called, and Felion's daughter came quickly to him, and with tears for her father and smiles for her husband, she left the valley and journeyed into the east, having sworn to love and cherish him while she lived. And her father, left solitary, mourned for her, and drew away into a hill above the valley in a cedar house that he built, and having little else to love, loved the earth, and sky, and animals, and the children from the little city when they came his way. But his heart was sore, for by and by no letters came from his daughter, and the little city, having prospered, concerned itself no more with him. When he came into its streets, there were those who laughed, for he was very tall and rude, and his grey hair hung loose on his shoulders, and his dress was still a hunter's. They had not long remembered the time when a grievous disease like a plague fell upon the place, and people died by scores, as sheep fall in a murrain. And again they had turned to him, and he, because he knew of a miraculous medicine got from Indian sachems whose people had suffered of this sickness, came into the little city, and by his medicines and fearless love and kindness he stayed the plague. And thus once more he saved the little city from disaster, and they blessed him for the moment, and the years went on. In time they ceased to think of Felion at all, and he was left alone. Even the children came no more to visit him, and he had pleasure only in hunting and shooting, and in felling trees, with which he built a high stockade and a fine cedar house within it. And all the work of this he did with his own hands, even to the polishing of the floors and the carved work of the large fireplaces. Yet he never lived in the house, nor in any room of it, and the stockade gate was always shut. And when any people passed that way, they stared and shrugged their shoulders, and thought Felion mad or a fool. But he was wise in his own way, which was not the way of those who had reason to bless him forever, and who forgot him, though he had served them through so many years. Against the little city he had an exceeding bitterness, and this grew. And had it not been that his heart was kept young by the love of the earth and the beasts about him in the hills, he must needs have cursed the place and died. But the sight of a bird in the nest with her young, and the smell of a lair, and the light of the dawn that came out of the east, and the winds that came up from the sea, and the hope that would not die, kept him from being of those who love not life for life's sake, be it in ease or in sorrow. He was of those who find all worth the doing, even all worth the suffering. And so, though he frowned and his lips drew tight with anger when he looked down at the little city, he felt that elsewhere in the world there was that which made it worth the saving. If his daughter had been with him, he would have laughed at that which his own hands had founded, protected, and saved. But no word came from her, and laughter was never on his lips, only an occasional smile when, perhaps, he saw two sparrows fighting, or watched the fish chase each other in the river, or a toad, too lazy to jump, walk stupidly like a convict, dragging his long green legs behind him. And when he looked up towards Shaknon and Margath, a light came into his eyes, for they were wise and quiet, and watched the world, and something of their grandeur drew about him like a cloak. As age cut deep lines in his face and gave angles to his figure, a strange settled dignity grew upon him, whether he swung his axe by the balsams, or dressed the skins of the animals he had killed, piling up the pelts in a long shed in the stockade, a goodly heritage for his daughter if she ever came back. Every day at sunrise he walked to the door of his house, and looked eastward steadily, and sometimes there broke from his lips the words, "My daughter, my Lise." Again he would sit and brood with his chin in his hand, and smile, as though remembering pleasant things. One day at last, in the full tide of summer, a man, haggard and troubled, came to Felion's house and knocked, and, getting no reply, waited, and whenever he looked down at the little city he wrung his hands, and more than once he put them up to his face and shuddered, and again looked for Felion. Just when the dusk was rolling down, Felion came back, and, seeing the man, would have passed him without a word, but that the man stopped with an eager, sorrowful gesture and said, "The plague has come upon us again, and the people, remembering how you healed them long ago, beg you to come." At that Felion leaned his fishing rod against the door and answered, "What people?" The other then replied, "The people of the little city below, Felion." I do not know your name, was the reply. I know not of you or your city. Are you mad? Cried the man. Do you forget the little city down there? Have you no heart? A strange smile passed over Phalion's face, and he answered, When one forgets, why should the other remember? He turned and went into the house and shut the door, and though the man knocked, the door was not opened, and he went back angry and miserable, and the people could not believe that Phalion would not come to help them, as he had done all his life. At dawn 3 others came, and they found Phalion looking out towards the east, his lips moving as though he prayed. Yet it was no prayer, only a call that was on his lips. They felt a sort of awe in his presence, for now he seemed as if he had lived more than a century, so wise and old was the look of his face, so white his hair, so set and distant his dignity. They begged him to come, and bringing his medicines, save the people, for death was galloping through the town, knocking at many doors. One came to heal you, he answered, the young man of the schools, who wrote mystic letters after his name. It swings on a brass by his door. Where is he? He is dead of the plague, they replied, and the other also that came with him, who fled before the sickness, fell dead of it on the roadside, going to the sea. Why should I go, he replied, and he turned threateningly to his weapon, as if in menace of their presence. You have no one to leave behind, they answered eagerly, and you are old. Liars, he rejoined, let the little city save itself. And he wheeled and went into his house, and they saw that they had erred in not remembering his daughter, whose presence they had once prized. They saw that they had angered him beyond soothing, and they went back in grief, for 2 of them had lost dear relatives by the fell sickness. When they told what had happened, the people said, We will send the women, he will listen to them. He had a daughter. That afternoon, when all the hills lay still and dead, and nowhere did bird or breeze stir, the women came, and they found him seated with his back turned to the town. He was looking into the deep woods, into the hot shadows of the trees. We have come to bring you to the little city, they said to him. The sick grow in numbers every hour. It is safe in the hills, he answered, not looking at them. Why do the people stay in the valley? Every man has a friend or a wife or a child, ill or dying, and every woman has a husband or a child or a friend or a brother. Cowards have fled, and many of them have fallen by the way. Last summer I lay sick here many weeks, and none came near me. Why should I go to the little city, he replied austerely. 4 times I saved it, and of all that I saved, none came to give me water to drink or food to eat, and I lay burning with fever, and thirsty and hungry. God of heaven, how thirsty! We did not know, they answered humbly. You came to us so seldom. We had forgotten. We were fools. I came and went 50 years, he answered bitterly, and I have forgotten how to rid the little city of the plague. At that one of the women, mad with anger, made as if to catch him by his beard. But she forbore and said, Liar! The men shall hang you to your own roof-tree. His eyes had a wild light, but he waved his hand quietly and answered, Begone, and learn how great a sin is ingratitude. He turned away from them gloomily, and would have entered his home, but one of the women, who was young, plucked his sleeve and said sorrowfully, I loved Malise, your daughter, and forgot her and her father. I am 70 years, and she has been gone 15, and for the first time I see your face, was his scornful reply. She was tempted to say, I was ever bearing children and nursing them, and the hills were hard to climb, and my husband would not go. But she saw how dark his look was, and she hid her face in her hands and turned away to follow after the others. She had 5 little children, and her heart was anxious for them and her eyes full of tears. Anger and remorse seized on the little city, and there were those who would have killed Phalion, but others saw that the old man had been sorely wronged in the past, and these said, Wait until the morrow, and we will devise something. That night a mule train crept slowly down the mountainside and entered the little city, for no one who came with them knew of the plague. The caravan had come from the east across the Great Plains, and not from the west, which was the travelled highway to the sea. Among them was a woman who already was ill of a fever, and knew not of what passed round her. She had with her a beautiful child, and one of the women of the place devised a thing. "This woman," she said, "does not belong to the little city, and he can have nothing against her. She is a stranger. Let one of us take this beautiful lad to him, and he shall ask Phalion to come and save his mother." Everyone approved the woman's wisdom, and in the early morning she herself, with another, took the child, and went up the long hillside in the gross heat. And when she came near Phalion's house, the women stayed behind, and the child went forward, having been taught what to say to the old man. Phalion sat just within his doorway, looking out into the sunlight which fell upon the red and white walls of the little city, flanked by young orchards, with great oozy meadows beyond these, where cattle ate, knee-deep in the lush grass and cool reed beds. Along the riverside, far up on the high banks, were the tall couches of dead Indians, set on poles, their useless weapons laid along the deerskin pall. Down the hurrying river there passed a raft bearing a black flag on a pole, and on it were women and children who were being taken down to the sea from the doomed city. These were they who had lost fathers and brothers, and now were going out alone with the shadow of the plague over them, for there was none to say them nay. The tall oarsmen bent to their task, and Phalion felt his blood beat faster when he saw the huge oars swing high, then drop and bend in the water, as the raft swung straight in its course and passed on safe through the narrow slide into the white rapids below, which licked the long timbers as with white tongues, and tossed spray upon the sad voyagers. Phalion remembered the day when he left his own child behind, and sprang from the bridge to the raft whereon were the children of the little city, and saved them. And when he tried to be angry now, the thought of the children as they watched him, with his broken legs striving against their peril, softened his heart. He shook his head, for suddenly there came to him the memory of a time, 80 years before, when he and the foundryman's daughter had gone hunting flag-flowers by the little trout stream, of the songs they sang together at the festivals, she in her sweet Quaker garb and demure Quaker beauty, he lithe, alert, and full of the joy of life and loving. As he sat so, thinking, he wondered where she was, and why he should be thinking of her now, facing the dreary sorrow of this pestilence, and his own anger and vengeance. He nodded softly to the waving trees far down in the valley, for his thoughts had drifted on to his wife as he first saw her. She was standing bare-armed among the grapevines by a wall of rock, the dew of rich life on her lip and forehead, her grey eyes swimming with a soft light. And looking at her, he had loved her at once, as he had loved, on the instant, the little child that came to him later, as he had loved the girl into which the child grew, till she left him and came back no more. Why had he never gone in search of her? He got to his feet involuntarily and stepped towards the door, looking down into the valley. As his eyes rested on the little city, his face grew dark. But his eyes were troubled and presently grew bewildered, for out of a green covert near there stepped a pretty boy, who came to him with frank, unabashed face and a half-shy smile. Phalion did not speak at first, but stood looking, and presently the child said, "I have come to fetch you." "To fetch me where, little man?" asked Phalion, a light coming into his face, his heart beating faster. "To my mother. She is sick." "Where is your mother?" "She's in the village down there," answered the boy, pointing. In spite of himself, Phalion smiled in a sour sort of way, for the boy had called the place a village, and he relished the unconscious irony. "What is the matter with her?" asked Phalion, beckoning the lad inside. The lad came and stood in the doorway, gazing round curiously, while the old man sat down and looked at him, moved, he knew not why. The bright steel of Felion's axe, standing in the corner, caught the lad's eye and held it. Felion saw and said, "What are you thinking of?" The lad answered, "Of the axe. When I'm bigger, I will cut down trees and build a house, a bridge, and a city. Aren't you coming quick to help my mother? She will die if you don't come." Felion did not answer, and from the trees without, 2 women watched him anxiously. "Why should I come?" asked Felion, curiously. "Because she's sick, and she's my mother." "Why should I do it because she's your mother?" "I don't know," the lad answered, and his brow knitted in the attempt to think it out. "But I like you." He came and stood beside the old man and looked into his face with a pleasant confidence. "If your mother was sick and I could heal her, I would. I know I would. I wouldn't be afraid to go down into the village." Here were rebuke, love, and impeachment, all in one, and the old man half started from his seat. "Did you think I was afraid?" he asked of the boy, as simply as might a child of a child. So near are children and wise men in their thoughts. "I knew if you didn't it'd be because you were angry or were afraid, and you didn't look angry." "How does one look when one is angry?" "Like my father." "And how does your father look?" "My father's dead." "Did he die of the plague?" asked Felion, laying his hand on the lad's shoulder. "No," said the lad quickly, and shut his lips tight. "Won't you tell me?" asked Felion, with a strange inquisitiveness. "No, Mother'll tell you, but I won't." And the lad's eyes filled with tears. Poor boy, said Felion, and his hand tightened on the small shoulder. "Don't be sorry for me. Be sorry for Mother, please," said the boy, and he laid a hand on the old man's knee, and that touch went to a heart long closed against the little city below. And Felion rose and said, "I will go with you to your mother." Then he went into another room, and the boy came near the axe and ran his fingers along the bright steel and fondled the handle, as does a hunter the tried weapon which has been his through many seasons. When the old man came back, he said to the boy, "Why do you look at the axe?" "I don't know," was the answer. "Maybe because my mother used to sing a song about the woodcutters." Without a word, and thinking much, he stepped out into the path leading to the little city, the lad holding one hand. Years afterwards, men spoke with a sort of awe or reverence of seeing the beautiful stranger lad leading old Felion into the plague-stricken place, and how, as they passed, women threw themselves at Felion's feet, begging him to save their loved ones. And a drunkard cast his arm round the old man's shoulder and sputtered foolish pleadings into his ear. But Felion only waved them back gently and said, "By and by, by and by, God help us all." Now a fevered hand snatched at him from a doorway. Meanings came from everywhere, and more than once he almost stumbled over a dead body. Others he saw being carried away to the graveyard for hasty burial. Few were the mourners who followed, and the faces of those who watched the processions go by were set and drawn. The sunlight in the green trees seemed an insult to the dead. They passed into the house where the sick woman lay, and some met him at the door with faces of joy and meaning, for now they knew the woman and would have spoken to him of her, but he waved them off, and put his fingers upon his lips and went where a fire burned in the kitchen, and brewed his medicines. And the child entered the room where his mother lay, and presently he came to the kitchen and said, "She is asleep, my mother." The old man looked down on him a moment steadily, and a look of bewilderment came into his face, but he turned away again to the simmering pots. The boy went to the window and, leaning upon the sill, began to hum softly a sort of chant, while he watched a lizard running hither and thither in the sun. As he hummed, the old man listened, and presently, with his medicines in his hands and a half-startled look, he came over to the lad. "What are you humming?" he asked. The lad answered, "A song of the woodcutters." "Sing it again," said Felion. The lad began to sing, "Here shall I build me my cedar house, a city with gates, a road to the sea, for I am the Lord of the earth. Phew, phew. The old man stopped him. What is your name? My name is Felion, answered the lad, and he put his face close to the jug that held the steaming tinctures. But the old man caught the little chin in his huge hand and bent back the head, looking long into the lad's eyes. At last he caught little Felion's hand and hurried into the other room, where the woman lay in a stupor. The old man came quickly to her and looked into her face. Seeing, he gave a broken cry and said, Malise, my daughter. Malise. He drew her to his breast, and as he did so he groaned aloud, for he knew that inevitable death was waiting for her at the door. He straightened himself up, clasped the child to his breast, and said, I too am Felion, my little son. And then he set about to defeat that dark hovering figure at the door. For 3 long hours he sat beside her, giving her little by little his potent medicines, and now and again he stopped his mouth with his hand, lest he should cry out. And his eyes never wavered from her face, not even to the boy, who lay asleep in the corner. At last his look relaxed its vigilance, for a dewy look passed over the woman's face, and she opened her eyes and saw him, and gave a little cry of, Father, and was straightway lost in his arms. I have come home to die, she said. No, no, to live, he answered firmly. Why did you not send me word all these long years? My husband was in shame, in prison, and I in sorrow, she answered sadly. I could not. He is, he paused. He did evil. He is dead, she said. It is better so. Her eyes wandered round the room restlessly, and then fixed upon the sleeping child, and a smile passed over her face. She pointed to the lad. The old man nodded. He brought me here, he said gently. Then he got to his feet. You must sleep now, he added, and he gave her a cordial. I must go forth and save the sick. Is it a plague? She asked. He nodded. They said you would not come to save them, she continued reproachfully. You came to me because I was your Malise, only for that. No, no, he answered. I knew not who you were. I came to save a mother to her child. Thank God, my father, she said. With a smile, she hid her face in the pillow. At last, leaving her and the child asleep, old Felion went forth into the little city, and the people flocked to him, and for many days he came and went ceaselessly, and once more he saved the city, and the people blessed him, and the years go on. End of section 28.
Section 29 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nemo and Eva Davis. The Lane That Had No Turning and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. The Forge in the Valley. He lay where he could see her working at the forge. As she worked, she sang,
When God was making the world, swift is the wind and white is the fire. The feet of his people danced the stars. There was laughter and swinging bells, and clanging iron and breaking breath. The hammers of heaven making the hills, the veils on the anvil of God. Wild is the fire and low is the wind.
His eyes were shining, and his face had a pale radiance from the reflected light, though he lay in the shadow where he could watch her, while she could not see him. Now her hand was upon the bellows, and the low white fire seethed hungrily up and set its teeth upon the iron she held. Now it turned the iron about upon the anvil, and the sparks showered about her very softly and strangely. There was a cheerful gravity in her motions, a high, fine look in her face. They too lived alone in the solitudes of Megalon Valley. It was night now, and the pleasant gloom of the valley was not broken by any sound save the hum of the stream near by, and the song and the ringing anvil. But into the workshop came the moist, fragrant smell of the acacia and the maple, and a long brown lizard stretched its neck sleepily across the threshold of the door opening into the valley. The song went on.
When God had finished the world, bright was the fire and sweet was the wind. Up from the valleys came song to answer the morning stars, and the hand of man on the anvil rang. His breath was big in his breast, his life beat strong on the walls of the world. Glad as the wind and tall as the fire.
He put his hands to his eyes and took them away again, as if to make sure that the song was not a dream. Wonder grew upon his thin bearded face. He ran his fingers through his thick hair in a dazed way. Then he lay and looked, and a rich warm flush crept over his cheek and stayed there. There was a great gap in his memory. The evening wore on. Once or twice the woman turned towards the room where the man lay, and listened. She could not see his face from where she stood. At such times he lay still, though his heart beat quickly, like that of an expectant child. His lips opened to speak, but still they remained silent. As yet he was like a returned traveller who does not quickly recognize old familiar things, and who is struggling with vague suggestions and forgotten events. As time went on, the woman turned towards the doorway oftener, and shifted her position so that she faced it, and the sparks, flying up, lighted her face with a wonderful irregular brightness. "Samantha," he said at last, and his voice sounded so strange to him that the word quivered timidly towards her. She paused upon a stroke, and some new note in his voice sent so sudden a thrill to her heart that she caught her breath with a painful kind of joy. The hammer dropped upon the anvil, and in a moment she stood in the doorway of his room.
Francis, Francis,
she said in a low whisper. He started up from his couch of skins. "Samantha, my wife!" he cried in a strong, proud voice. She dropped beside him and caught his head like a mother to her shoulder, and set her warm lips on his forehead and hair with a kind of hunger. Then he drew her face down and kissed her on the lips. Tears hung at her eyes and presently dropped on her cheeks. A sob shook her, and then she was still, her hands grasping his shoulders. "Have I been ill?" he said.
You have been very ill, Francis.
"Has it been long?" Her fingers passed tenderly through his grizzled hair.
Too long, my husband,"
she replied. "Is it summer now?"
Yes, Francis, it is summer.
"Was it in the spring, Samantha?" "Yes, I think it was in the spring," he added, musing.
It was in the spring.
There was snow still on the mountain top. The river was running high, and wildfowl were gathered on the island in the lake. Yes, I remember, I think.
And the men were working at the mine,
she whispered, her voice shaking a little, and her eyes eagerly questioning his face. "Ah, the mine! It was the mine, Samantha," he said abruptly, his eyes flashing up. "I was working at the forge to make a great bolt for the machinery, and someone forgot and set the engine in motion. I ran out, but it was too late, and then—"
And then you tried to save them, Francis. And you were hurt.
"What month is this, my wife?"
It is December.
"And that was in October?"
Yes, in October.
"I've been ill since. What happened?"
Many were killed, Francis, and you and I came away.
Where are we now? I do not know the place.
This is Megalon Valley. You and I live alone here.
Why did you bring me here?
I did not bring you, Francis. You wished me to come. One day you said to me, there is a place in Megalon Valley where, long ago, an old man lived who had become a stranger among men, a place where the blackbird stays, and the wolf-dog troops and hides, and the damson grows as thick as blossoms on the acacia tree. We will go there. And I came with you.
I do not remember, my wife. What of the mine? Was I a coward and left the mine? There was no one understood the ways of the wheel and rod and steam but me.
The mine is closed, Francis,
She answered gently.
You were no coward, but you had strange fancies.
When did the mine close? He said with a kind of sorrow. I put hard work and good years into it. At that moment, when her face drew close to his, the vision of her as she stood at the anvil came to him with a new impression, and he said again, in a half-frightened way, When did it close, Samantha?
The mine was closed 12 years ago, my husband.
He got to his feet and clasped her to his breast. A strength came to him which had eluded him 12 years, and she, womanlike, delighted in that strength, and, with a great gladness, changed eyes and hands with him, keeping her soul still her own, brooding and lofty, as is the soul of every true woman, though, like this one, she labors at a forge, and in a far, untenanted country, is faithful friend, ceaseless apothecary to a comrade with a disordered mind, living on savage meats, clothing herself and the other in skins, and, with a divine persistence, keeping a cheerful heart, certain that the intelligence which was frightened from its home would come back one day. It should be hers to watch for the great moment and give the wanderer loving welcome, lest it should hurry madly away again into the desert, never to return. She had her reward, yet she wept. She had carried herself before him with the bright ways of an unvexed girl these 12 years past. She had earned the salt of her tears. He was dazed still, but, the doublet of his mind no longer embraced, he understood what she had been to him, and how she had tended him in absolute loneliness, her companions the wild things of the valley, these, and God. He drew her into the workshop, and put his hand upon the bellows, and churned them, so that the fire roared joyously up, and the place was red with the light. In this light he turned her to him and looked at her. The look was that of one who had come back from the dead, that naked, profound, unconditional gaze, which is as deep and honest as the primeval sense. His eyes fell upon her rich, firm, stately body. It lingered for a moment on the brown fullness of her hair. Then her look was gathered to his, and they fell into each other's arms. For long they sat in the solemn silence of their joy, and so awed were they by the thing which had come to them, that they felt no surprise when a wolf-dog crawled over the lizard on the threshold, and stole along the wall with shining, bloody eyes to an inner room, and stayed there munching meat to surfeit and drowsiness, and at last crept out and lay beside the forge in a thick sleep. These two had lived so much with the untamed things of nature, the bellows and the fire had been so long there, and the clang of the anvil was so familiar, that there was a kinship among them, man and beast, with a woman as ruler. "Tell me, my wife," he said at last, "what has happened during those 12 years? All from the first. Keep nothing back. I am strong now." He looked around the workshop, then, suddenly, at her, with a strange pain. and they both turned their heads away for an instant, for the same thought was on them. Then, presently, she spoke, and answered his shy, sorrowful thought before all else.
"The child is gone,"
she softly said. He sat still, but a sob was in his throat. He looked at her with a kind of fear. He wondered if his madness had cost the life of the child. She understood. "Did I ever see the child?" he said.
"Oh, yes. I sometimes thought that through the babe you would be yourself again. When you were near her, you never ceased to look at her and fondle her, as I thought, very timidly. And you would start sometimes and gaze at me with the old wise look hovering at your eyes. But the look did not stay. The child was fond of you, but she faded and pined. And one day, as you nursed her, you came to me and said, 'See, my wife, the little one will not wake.' She pulled at my beard and said, 'Daddy,' and fell asleep. And I took her from your arms. There is a chestnut tree near the door of our cottage at the mine. One night you and I buried her there, but you do not remember her, do you?"
My child, he said, looking out into the night, and he lifted up his arms and looked at them. "I held her here, and still I never held her. I fondled her, and yet I never fondled her. I buried her, yet to me she was never born."
"You have been far away, Francis. You have come back home. I waited and prayed and worked with you and was patient. It is very strange,"
she continued.
"In all these 12 years you cannot remember our past, though you remembered about this place. The one thing, as if God had made it so. And now you cannot remember those 12 years.
"Tell me now of the 12 years," he urged.
"It was the same from day to day. When we came from the mountain, we brought with us the implements of the forge upon a horse. Now and again, as we travelled, we cut our way through the heavy woods. You were changed for the better then. A dreadful trouble seemed to have gone from your face. There was a strong kind of peace in the valley, and there were so many birds and animals, and the smell of the trees was so fine that we were not lonely, neither you nor I."
She paused, thinking, her eyes looking out to where the evening star was sailing slowly out of the wooded horizon. His look on her. In the pause the wolf dog raised its big, sleepy eyes at them, then plunged its head into its paws, its wildness undisturbed by their presence. Presently the wife continued.
"At last we reached here, and here we have lived, where no human being save one has ever been. We put up the forge, and in a little hill not far away we found coal for it. The days went on. It was always summer, though there came at times a sharp frost, and covered the ground with a coverlet of white. But the birds were always with us, and the beasts were our friends. I learned to love even the shrill cry of the reed hens, and the soft tap-tap of the woodpecker is the sweetest music to my ear after the song of the anvil. How often have you and I stood here at the anvil, the fire heating the iron, and our hammers falling constantly. Oh, my husband, I knew that only here with God and his dumb creatures and his wonderful healing world, all sun and wind and flowers and blossoming trees, working as you used to work, as the first of men worked, with the sane wandering soul returned to you. The thought was in you too, for you led me here, and have been patient also in the awful exile of your mind."
"I have been as a child, and not as a man," he said gravely. "Shall I ever again be a man, as I once was, Samantha?"
"You cannot see yourself,"
she said.
"A week ago you fell ill, and since then you have been pale and worn. But your body has been and is that of a great strong man. In the morning I will take you to a spring in the hills, and you shall see yourself, my husband.
He stood up, stretched himself, went to the door, and looked out into the valley flooded with moonlight. He drew in a great draught of air, and said, "The world, the great wonderful world, where men live and love work and do strong things." He paused, and turned with a trouble in his face. "My wife," he said, "you have lived with a dead man 12 years, and I have lost 12 years in the world. I had a great thought once, an invention, but now—" He hung his head bitterly. She came to him, and her hand slid up along his breast to his shoulders, and rested there, and she said with a glad smile,
Francis, you have lost nothing. The thing, the invention, was all but finished when you fell ill a week ago. We have worked at it for these 12 years. Through it, I think, you have been brought back to me. Come, there is a little work yet to do upon it.
and she drew him to where a machine of iron lay in the corner. With a great cry he fell upon his knees beside it, and fondled it. Then presently he rose, and caught his wife to his breast. Together, a moment after, they stood beside the anvil. The wolf dog fled out into the night from the shower of sparks, as in the red light the two sang to the clanging of the hammers.
When God was making the world, swift is the wind and white is the fire.
End of section 26. End of The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac, by Gilbert Parker.